Welcome to our Transforming Transit Summit. I appreciate everybody being here today. My name is Leanne Redden. I am the Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority. And look, we even got the sun to come out for this afternoon. Really glad that everybody is here today. I know your time is very valuable and we really appreciate you giving us some of that time to share your thoughts and ideas as it relates to the transit system for our region. So I think you've all come through the registration table. They did a pretty good job of corralling everyone on the way in. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started that I think you also all walked past lunch. If you haven't grabbed something to eat, please do so. We want everyone to be well fueled up for the day. There will be some snacks later on because snacks are important to keep everyone's energy high as we go through today's program. There isn't a printed program per se. We will, on the slides in a few moments, show the overall agenda for the day and that be available to you. But rest assured that there will be plenty of time for engagement and feedback and input from you. That'll essentially be the second half of the entire program today. So please take a few moments to put your cell phones on silent. I know everyone's busy. If you do have to take a phone call, we do ask that you just step outside, especially during some of the panel conversations. That would be helpful. And I just want to take a moment to note the emergency exits. We've got the 3 big doors here, which would be the easiest way to exit. And then when you get out there are several ways downstairs. You can go down through the center area. If that's not available, there is an exit to the right. So that is the approach on an emergency situation. You can see that we're filming today. We will also be taking photos. The primary purpose of that is to compile the first half of today's conversations and post them on our website so they're available to the public at large and people who couldn't make it today. So we wanted to just make you aware of that as well. Once we get those recordings available, we'll also, since you've registered here, we'll make sure you directly get them a notification that they're available for use as well. We'll have more instructions about the breakout sessions as we get a little closer to that portion of the program. But we do want to encourage you to stay for the second half because that is really our opportunity. And when I say ours, it's not just the RTAs, but it's the 3 service boards who are here with us today to get your thoughts, input, and join us in conversation about the future of our transit system. Most of you, I think, are familiar with the RTA, but those of you who may not be, we are the Regional Transportation Authority, and we really are the funding and oversight organization with the 3 operators, CTA, Metra, and PACE. And I'm grateful that we have the Service Board leadership here, as well as their staff, who have provided us a lot of support and input in both the planning for this event and on the execution of it today. So I want to thank them for their time and effort. And we really look forward to hearing your input on the information that they'll share. So collectively, the Chicago region's transit system is the second largest in the US, providing about 1.2 million trips each day. And while it's a very large system, the RTA itself as an organization is relatively small, and our role is really often the convener, the coordinator across the transit system, and it's really wearing that hat that we convene this summit today. So over 2 years ago, we adopted a strategic plan called Transit is the Answer, and that was co-created with hundreds of stakeholders, riders, and advocates. Some of you are in the room today, and we really appreciate that input. We gathered riders and community members and transit professionals for the entire summer of meetings back in 2022, in addition to doing public surveys, virtual town halls, and other outreach meetings across the region. And since then, we've continued engaging stakeholders and the public at large through our Transit is the Answer coalition meetings, our recent reconfiguration of our Citizens Advisory Board that now has 10 members who represent riders from across the entire region who are not affiliated with any governmental entity. So it's through these summits today, and this marks the 3rd summit that we've hosted, that we're bringing people together from within and outside of the region who are passionate about improving public transportation. And I want to just take a moment to thank each of you in the room who took part in our strategic planning work and its development. who've attended coalition meetings, signed up for our newsletters, provided other public comments to us, and other ways that you've made your voices heard. That engagement and feedback really continues with this summit today, and you're going to hear a lot about those details later on, about the opportunities our transit system is facing. But I also want to underscore that what is even more vital is that we hear from you. As I noted, the second half of today's program will provide that opportunity for your thoughts and inputs on the plans, the ideas that the three transit operators have. So I encourage you to listen to the conversations that are going to transpire at the front end of this, stay engaged, think about the questions you want to ask, as well as input that you want to have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Whitehead, who is our Principal of Government Affairs at the RTA, who is also a long-time transit advocate and our MC for the day, to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne, and thank you everybody for coming. Excited to see so many engaged folks who we've worked with for years to address the issues we'll talk about today. Our first speaker is the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, Ram Villavalam. Senator Villavalam and his colleagues have been hosting hearings and discussions all across the state for more than a year now about the fiscal cliff, the main issue we'll talk about. Look forward to hearing from the senator on the latest. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyle, thank you. I was a little worried he would introduce me by saying, if the fiscal cliff isn't resolved, blame this guy. So I'm glad that that wasn't the introduction. It's great to be with you all. Good afternoon. My name is Ram Villavalam, as was mentioned, State Senator for the 8th District, and which is the northwest side of Chicago, northwest suburbs, and chair of the Illinois Senate Transportation Committee. First, I want to thank RTA, CTA, Metra, PACE for putting this together and your continued efforts for a couple of years now, and I'll get to that on this issue. I want to thank everyone for being here, especially the everyday riders, the people that use the system. Thank you for taking the time to be here and be engaged in this conversation. I know that some of you may have heard this before, but I always like to tell the journey that we're on. We started right with Leanne way back when RTA started raising the yellow flag a few years ago as to the fiscal cliff and having those meetings and conversations at the very outset about what will happen, what this could look like, and so much more. From there, the General Assembly commissioned a report, or asked CMAP to commission a report. Thousands of hours that went into these conversations at CMAP involving all the stakeholders, and that's what we have with the part report. From there, we introduced legislation that was sponsored by myself and Representative Delgado and Buckner and Evans in the House, brought to us by advocates from the environmental groups, good urban planning groups, and much more, but also by our friends in organized labor, the people that are on the front lines of this work. And from there, we've had committee hearings, the committee hearings that Kyle mentioned, and I always smile because I put Senate Transportation Committee members through a lot. We had over, I think, 8 hearings, and after the 3rd hearing, I stopped making promises as to how long they would be. But it was over 35 hours of testimony across the Northeastern Illinois region, but also, and we have to have a reminder for ourselves, downstate transit has its own needs as well. And so having those hearings were very educational and beneficial, that I think really is part of the reason, at least, of why we're here today and the conversations we're having now. So with that said, and I wanted to be brief, we're in the 4th quarter now, and I've stopped watching sports a couple years ago, or since I ever took this job, so if my sports analogies are off, that's why. we are though. We're 6 weeks to the end of session. Now is the time. And the work that the people in this room and much more do is the difference between inaction and filling the gap of $771 million. The work that the people in this room and much more do is the difference between $771 million and $1.5 billion. And I always say this, there's always going to be pressures that the Illinois General Assembly faces. We have a pension issue, we have a public transit issue, obviously. There's a number of funding requests in our healthcare areas, education, public safety, the list goes on. None of them are more or less important. However, they are all connected. And so I would argue, and as I have been to my colleagues, public transit is the issue that impacts every other issue. And so as we embark on today's conversation in the next 6 weeks, as you all talk to your state legislators, I think one, we should be thinking about the mother that has a 5-year-old and a newborn that is going to get her bachelor's in computer science and takes the CTA bus like my mother did. The high school student that took the orange line to the brown line and depending on the weather, the Armitage bus to Lincoln Park High School like I did. But also the bus driver that shows up every day, the train conductor that shows up every day to make those trips possible. And we need to remind our legislators, my colleagues, that in every district, no matter what district you represent, there are people like that. And so that's what I think the next 6 weeks should be about. We are, again, bad analogies, but I was going to say the plane is circling the airport, but I'll use the train is getting closer to the station and the bus is getting closer to the garage. So have faith that we are working through this process legislatively. But again, I would point to the difference between inaction and 771 to 1.5 is in this room. And so I look forward to working with you. I look forward to hearing from the other agencies. And I'll say this, whenever I visit other areas, they talk about how great our public transit system is. And I make that comment because I look forward to hearing what we can take from other public transit systems, the good practices. We can always improve. I will always say that. We can always improve. At the same time, I know that through hearings and others, we've had these conversations. I do want to highlight the fact that we have to avoid the 40% cut that's been reported on, and we have to acknowledge what is going well as well. So I look forward to the conversation today. Thanks again for having me and for all the work that everyone's doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just give a brief overview of what's to come in the program. We'll have an opening conversation with Leanne and Nick, which we'll transition to in a bit. After that, we will have a peer panel discussion hosted by RTA with leaders from Washington and the Bay Area. Then we'll have a short break, and each of the executive directors from the service boards will come up for a conversation with Leanne about the future of the transit system. And then that final hour of the event will be the interactive sessions where all of you will have an opportunity to talk directly to staff from RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE and learn about some of the current initiatives each of the agencies have going and why sustainable funding is needed to continue to make progress. So we will kick things off with Leanne and WTTW's Nick Blumberg. Nick has been following the transit issue closely, and we all rely on his reporting, so look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. And thank you for sitting down and talking. We've heard from you, from Senator Villivalum. I think everyone in this room knows well about the fiscal cliff that the region system is facing this year. And I know we've talked before about the fact that this is something that the pandemic exacerbated, but it wasn't necessarily a brand new set of issues that the service boards were facing. But how did COVID-19 kind of change things for the transit system in the region?
Well, I think, as you noted, it exacerbated, I think, some trends and things that we were already seeing. One thing it certainly did was change the way people travel, live, work, and generally just move around our region. So it's really changed the dynamic of how, the types and the levels of service that the three operators need to provide. And it's just how people are just living and working these days. I think we have, we use these stats, more than 90% of the riders are back on the system, but they're just riding differently. Weekend and evening ridership is significantly up. We're continuing to see growth in the day-to-day sort of traditional work commute, but it's, it has the COVID pandemic significantly impacted all of that.
Yeah, and the people returning for the day-to-day commutes, it may not be at a pace that provides the sort of revenue that's needed.
And when you have changes in the ridership, I mean that we as a region are required to have a 50% fare box recovery ratio. So that means that 50% of the revenue technically is required to meet the operating expenses of the system. Now we have a waiver from the state legislature in this interim period, but it presents some challenges. It also is restrictive and prohibits the three operators from sometimes doing some creative and new things because they've got to kind of drive towards this what might be the most sort of efficient under one parameter.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit with the fare box recovery ratio. I know folks, have also raised issues about, our state support relative to, other peer agencies. What kinds of challenges do those present?
Well, I think we've been very vocal in saying that our region receives about 17% of its operating expenses covered by the state. And by comparison, you've got your Phillies, New York area, ranging from anywhere from 38 to 50% of the state's revenues to cover the operations. So it puts us at a bit of an impediment behind that. And so what that means is we have to find either other sources of revenue for the region, but it really restricts the levels of service that can be provided.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of what the consequences of, inaction or insufficient action might be. I know we've talked about this many times about, sort of the various ways that this could play out, the different effects it could have. If you're just looking at in terms of passengers for service cuts, for potential fare hikes, what could that impact be like for folks?
So we've been very vocal in the last couple of weeks about what the impact of failing to fill the fiscal gap that we're facing. And the cuts across this region will just be absolutely devastating. And I don't think we can understate that. The impacts across all three operators. I've had some people come back to me and say, "Oh, we've had doomsday in this region before," but that was only with one operator, and this is going to materially affect all three operators. You'll see the roll-up number is 40% of cut to service across the entire region. But to give some examples of what that looks like, across CTA's 8 rail lines, you're going to see portions or all of those 4 of those lines shut down. You're going to see reductions and eliminations of, late night services. So gone are the 24-hour services that CTA currently provides. You could see across the PACE system, all weekend service completely gone. You could see, related to that, you end up with about a 66% reduction in ADA paratransit services. So that leaves people with disabilities, for example, without any real meaningful and reliable way to get around the region. On the Metra rail system, instead of seeing some of the service expansions and the new schedules that they've been putting out, we go completely in the other direction. You'll see the elimination of early morning and evening services across Metra. You'll see larger gaps during the day in the middays, bigger gaps on the weekend, for all three of them, really going in the exact opposite direction to where they've been going and the new services and the additional services that they've been providing. And so, that's just the impact to the people who use and ride the transit system. But then you start to look at the impact of, it's 3,000 direct job losses within the transit system, not to mention then the ripple effect across the broader economy. We talk a lot about, the role, the value, or the benefit of the transit network in our region, but you'll have employers not being able to get employees to work. And that just keeps having this sort of downward spiral effect. traffic congestion, for those, I say this to my friends in the suburbs who never get on a bus or train and say, well, it doesn't really impact me, so I don't really care. Well, all those trips are going to be, or many of those trips are going to be in the car in front of you on an already congested highway. We estimated to capture or to cover that level of increased traffic, you would need 26 lanes of additional highway across our entire network. First of all, that's not going to happen. So, what's already sort of sometimes congested and unreliable highway situation is going to only be much, much worse. So I think that that's just some examples of what will be faced if we're not able to fill the gap.
Well, and I know, all those things play into sort of the economic impact here. I know you all have done some research on, sort of the broader impact on the economy of having a healthy transit system and what, the dollars in really translate to.
Yeah, I mean, the downside on the doomsday scenario is it's about a $2.6 billion loss in GDP for our region. I know that's a number that sort of doesn't necessarily translate to everybody, but you can start to see how the ripple effects that I just described affect individuals and small businesses alike. But on the flip side, if we are successful in choosing to invest in the region to the tune, as Senator Velivalam mentioned, $1.5 billion, you see an upside of additional GDP of about $2.7 billion into the region. So the impacts are great, and I think people need to understand what's at risk as well as what is the potential of the system.
Well, and the senator mentioned, one of the bills that's been proposed, by the group of labor organizations and other advocates, looking at some governance reforms. A lot of those are in line with some ideas that, RTA has come out with. I know you've been vocal across those many hours of hearings that, a wholesale merger is not the way you see as the best path forward. I mean, when you look at the question of governance reform, how do you think, what's the best way to make that work?
So and the senator talked about being in the fourth quarter. I keep referring to we're approaching the finish line, and I see three things that sort of have to be addressed to get us to the finish line. One is reform, and that when I say reform, I'm referring to sort of rider and sort of taxpayer-focused outcomes that improve the operations of the transit system. We still have to deal with the funding conversation, and as the senator referenced, those conversations are starting to happen in parallel. And then there is what I call the governance piece, which is sort of how the boards are structured. We are focused on our work right now very much in the reform space and talking about sort of these outcomes that improve the transit system for riders and taxpayers across our region. And our idea is and these are things that we've heard not just from legislators but from riders as well across the region, and sort of driving outcomes that could roll up fair policy to the regional level and rider communication. So some of these things that make perhaps more sense to be thought about on a regional perspective, but also freeing the three operators up to do what they do best, which is operate the buses and the trains. But also holding the RTA at the regional level accountable for delivering on some of these things. So the three key buckets of reform that we've been talking a lot about is this, fair policy and rider communication. The second one is around service standards and really clearly defining what service standards look across within our three diverse operators and our very diverse and broad region. So defining, it's not one size fits all, the right level of service for the right part of the region. And then with funding accordingly to that, but holding all of us accountable to the delivery of that. And then the third bucket essentially is capital project prioritization, as well as if we are if we're successful and looking to even do expansions across our region, that the conversation about what those alternatives look like, the prioritization of those big mega projects resides at the regional level. So the region as a whole, including the three operators, has the conversation about what that priority should be and what those outcomes should look like.
Well, and I would have to imagine that sort of regional level of coordination for capital projects, things like that, that also will, be of benefit in terms of, service delivery, in terms of better coordination for, when we're looking at expansions or big overhauls and things like that. If there is a more regional focus, do you think that could be something that ultimately improves, sort of the rider experience for folks?
Absolutely. I think that there's always going to be limited resources both on the capital and the operating side, and I think what we need to collectively do a better job at is sort of thinking through what those allocations of resources are and how they better serve the riders of the region as a whole, and balancing all those challenging but also sometimes competing interests. And that's sort of a responsibility that we are offering to step up to at the RTA.
Well, whether it's the fourth quarter or nearing the finish line or whatever metaphor we want to choose, the end of the spring session will be here pretty quickly. What sort of concerns do you have about the potential for maybe there are some governance reform or service things that pass, but that we don't necessarily have the fiscal cliff addressed by the end of May?
Well, I want to be cautiously optimistic that is not the outcome, because I think there is just too much at stake, too much at risk. And one thing that we did highlight when we talked about sort of the doomsday scenario as it's been coined is it's not just a one and done thing too. Once you start unwinding and dismantling service, it becomes this sort of negative downward spiral. So you can't just turn that back on with like the flip of a switch. And so our hope is that it does come together with reform, because we recognize and have putting forward ideas for reform. We recognize that there won't be funding without reform. So with that acknowledged, I think we've tried to sort of articulate what those reform areas could be. We have begun conversations about what funding could look like and what the options and alternatives are, and starting those conversations with the legislature now. And we are in sort of that last 6-week stretch. I think there's going to be, the pace is increasing, shall we say. We are all collectively, the four agencies collectively spending quite a bit of time in Springfield, engaged in those conversations. And a lot of this starts to sort of run, I think, on a parallel path, sort of reform policy, legislation, probably with hopefully a funding package at the same time. Because if we don't address this by this end of this May legislative session, just the timing of our budgets, we have to, by statute as a region, have to have a balanced budget. We have to have funding certainty around that. We begin that work this summer. And if we don't have certainty around funding, the 3 service boards have to do a very prescribed process on how to plan for these massive service cuts and fare increases. If anyone's followed anything in the transit space, Philadelphia is ahead of the curve, sadly, in this space, and we've learned a lot and we've spent a lot of time talking to them. We don't want to have to go down that path, but we will. And so even though we don't fall off the fiscal cliff until 2026, we actually have to begin planning for those service cuts and fare increases that will go into effect in January next year, or begin to go into effect January next year. And so we just have to, that's the concern and sort of the alarm that we're raising around the May deadline.
Well, in addition to sort of the doomsday scenario, the red flags, there's also been an idea of what if we do more? What if we go beyond merely, plugging that budget gap? The idea that the senator mentioned of, having $1.5 billion in public funding for transit each year. What kinds of things could the transit system in the region do with that level of public support?
Yeah, and I think the first point to make is, this is an investment in the region, and the impact can be huge. So in terms of, and I think when we come up with the panel with the CEOs, we'll talk a little bit more, I'll get them to talk a little bit more specifically, but just to give some broad strokes on some of that, you're going to see a 40% increase in services across the entire region. CTA trains coming every sort of 6 minutes or so. About every 8 minutes or so on the bus side, 6 minutes. You can start to see on the PACE system, 7 days a week service at greater frequency. In the more dense areas, sort of anywhere from 7 to 15 minutes between buses, which is nothing. It's essentially almost doubling some of the services around. On Metra, adding more frequency of service, better express services, expansion on the evenings and weekends, for example, where their real growth markets are. And I think, you start to unlock that, and it becomes sort of this positive effect of building more ridership, building more revenue, and you can do more. Then if you layer in some capital investment on the back end, it really starts to even unlock a lot more opportunities around the entire region. Then you've got sort of the whole benefits. I mentioned sort of the GDP growth and the support it provides to, employers in the region, businesses in the region, and it just has that sort of ripple effect in a positive way that we would love to see, and it really becomes an investment in our region.
Some of the conversations, with lawmakers have been about, they're wanting to see more coordination among the different pieces of the system. What are some of the efforts that have been, ongoing in the last few years to really boost that coordination?
Yeah, we do a lot of coordination amongst the four agencies. We've already got, Metra is the fare payment system, and it's utilized by all three operators. We already have a fully integrated regional monthly pass. We are hoping to very soon launch the fully integrated one-day pass across the region. It's really been some of the technology that hasn't had the investment in it to really support some of that. But, the integrated reduced and free ride programs across the region, we've expanded into what we call the Access program, which is for people experiencing low incomes, expanding that further across the region beyond, it's with Metra now, but across to CTA and PACE. I think improved signage, improved customer information are going to be some of those very customer-facing pieces that you can see with continued investment and coordination across all three agencies.
And, when you're talking with legislators or just, folks in general, what's the way you try to help them understand why transit is important, not just for the folks who are taking it every day? We talked about some of the outcomes of, potential cuts, but when you're sort of making the pitch to folks why this is something they really need to get behind and support, what do you tell them?
Well, we tell them it's an investment in the region, it's investment in the economy, it's about jobs, it's about, just better quality of life, mobility for all people across our region. Whether you ride a bus or train, it is important that people understand. We're one of the few regions in the world that's never really had a shutdown of a system. And so I think people often take it for granted that the transit system will always be here. I hope we can continue that track record of no shutdown, but sometimes it's hard to also make the case of something that they've never had to experience on the negative side. That's why we were so vocal in sort of talking about what the doomsday scenario risk really is for the region.
And do you feel like that message is getting through to folks? Obviously, the people in this room are engaged, they know it well, but, more broadly, do you think people understand the gravity of the situation?
I think we're getting people's attention. Just some of the coverage we got in the past month or so around sort of the failure to invest and then invest, I think got some really good media coverage. We actually this week are beginning a full advertising campaign that will speak to the public at large about what is at risk as well, to sort of make sure that message is breaking through. It's hard. There's a lot of clutter. There's a lot of noise in the sort of the media and the digital space, but we really want to make sure that people understand, and we will be encouraging them to engage, call their legislators, talk about what is at risk and why it's important for them.
Well, and, obviously the senator mentioned that this isn't, there are lots of other, state lawmakers who may have a say in this who aren't necessarily from around this region. But does it feel like this is something that people understand why it's a benefit not just to, Chicagoland, but to Illinois more broadly?
Yeah, I think they do. Sadly, I've been doing this quite a while, and I was around for a previous sort of funding and reform conversation. And one thing I really feel, there is a sense across the legislature generally that they understand that there is a value and importance to the transit system. When we were having some of these conversations, sort of the late 2000s, 2007, 2008 timeframe, I felt like a lot of the conversation was about really 101. This is what the transit system is, and this is the benefit. So I feel like that understanding is there. I think what people want to better understand, and this is the conversation we're continuing to have with our local elected officials, is some of the specifics around what would that investment looks like for them, their district, their area, their communities.
Well, and when you're talking with, whether it's transit riders or just members of the public, folks in this room, what are you asking them to do right now as we're facing down this crisis? Stay
engaged, speak up, contact your legislature, give us feedback today. I think everyone's voices are just critical, especially as we're on this, I'll just say the home stretch. I was going to go for another sports metaphor, but I'd probably mess it up. So yeah, but I think just staying engaged and seriously talking with your state elected officials about the role, the benefits, and the importance.
Well, you mentioned you're remaining optimistic. Are you feeling good that this is, well, maybe good isn't the right word, but are you feeling hopeful about the way this process will play out in the coming weeks and months?
I'm always hopeful, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do this. But I do feel like that there is some growing momentum, and the Senator touched on that. I do feel like, you know, these things tend to kind of come together. There's some coalescing in those final weeks, and I do get that sense of some action, some momentum. So I am, as I said, cautiously optimistic.
All right, well, I know you and I are almost out of time, but I want to see what else you think is important for folks in this room to hear as we get the day started.
I just think if just stay engaged, listen to the upcoming panels. I think that they're going to give a good foundation for the conversation, because it is really important that you give us feedback and not just sort of hear from us. We do want it to be a two-way conversation. I think that that is really important as we sort of make this last push towards funding and investing in the transit system for our region.
Well, it's been a busy 6 weeks, or it's going to be a busy 6 weeks, so I hope you stay well caffeinated as much as you need to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Leanne and Nick. I think now we're going to do a quick preview of an ad campaign that we'll be rolling out later this week, urging people to contact their legislators and address the fiscal cliff.
Our transit system is at a crossroads. If state legislators fully fund transit by the summer, we can cut wait times nearly in half, have safer, cleaner rides, and make transit better than ever. But if they ignore transit's funding crisis, we will face 40% service cuts that will make rides overcrowded and make congestion unbearable. We can't afford to be stuck in traffic. Tell your legislator at savetransitnow.org.
So hopefully you'll be seeing that in your experience throughout the day, the campaign launching later this week. You also have QR codes at your table right now. You can go ahead and scan that QR code and it'll take you to a call to action. Fill in that form. There's a letter in there that's pre-written for you, but if you'd like to edit or add to it, please go ahead and do that. So we're going to bring up our next panel, but we'll pause just for a few minutes to give everybody a chance to check out the call to action webpage. Go ahead and take action and share it with your networks. Thanks. I think we're okay. At each of our events, one of the most popular part of the program has been hearing from peer agency leaders. I know when we talk with staff and leadership from agencies all across the country, I'm always struck by how they are dealing with many of the same issues we are, regardless of the geography, the governance structure, the issues that affect public transit in terms of funding and planning are very similar all across the country. So therefore, we can learn from one another and hear about strategies that are effective in other regions and try to bring those back here, especially in times like this when we are really fighting for the future of the system. So for more on that, I will hand it off to my colleague, RTA Deputy Executive Director, Maulik Vaishnav. Maulik.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. As Kyle was saying, this has probably been one of our most exciting part of the agendas the last couple of times. People have really given high marks to us bringing our peers here and having a conversation with them. I'll quickly introduce them and then make sure I'm speaking the least and they're giving you the most amount of information possible. So we have Randy Clarke. He's the CEO of WMATA in Washington, D.C. since July of 2022. He has seen the turnaround of Metro in Washington, and he's a very common rider on the system too. So he'll be talking about a lot of the lessons we can learn from WMATA in Washington, D.C. of how things have gone for them, both on the funding side and then also on the customer experience and other improvements. And then we have Andrew Fremier from San Francisco MTC. MTC has a huge portfolio. It's not an operating agency, semi-similar to RTA, but he'll also be informing us a lot about how the fiscal cliff conversation has evolved in the Bay Area. So I'll just jump right into our questions. I'll start with Randy. I think people would love to know a little bit of background on the system, especially related to transit governance and how things are functioning in Washington, D.C. for you right now.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Leanne and everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I won't comment on how things are functioning in Washington, D.C., but I can talk about Metro. Good, we broke the ice. There we go. That's how it's done. I mean, there's nothing to see. Overall at Metro, just if people haven't been to the, we're the large system in the DC kind of metro area. There are a variety of other operators. We have 2 regional rail, commuter rail, one in Maryland, one in Virginia. We have about, I think there's 9 smaller regional bus operators, but we are obviously the major transit system in the DC area. So, the DC area, one of the larger metro areas in the country, is probably like 6.5, 6.7 or something like that million. Right now we're back to spring break this week, but like last week, we're averaging about 1 million people a day back on the system between bus and rail. So we usually go back and forth between CTA is the second or third largest rail system in the country for ridership. I think we're 2 right now. I'm sure CTA wants to take that back. We're going to do our best to defend number 2. We obviously have a very extensive bus system as well. We're kind of unique. We have this really, in some ways amazing, in some ways very challenging model. We have 3 states. I'm from DC, so DC is a state in my book. So we have 3 states and the federal government. My board consists of 2 members from Virginia, 2 from Maryland, 2 from DC, and 2 from the federal government. And the 3 states all actually have their own veto authority against each other. So anytime anyone wants to talk about governance models and funding models, there's everything else, and then there's what we have. But with that said, it is the thing that unites the region together. So the uniqueness is an amazing strength and challenge. We also have different cycles. So the Virginia legislature meets at a different time as the Maryland legislature, which in their budget cycles is different than the DC government cycle. And then obviously we change. We get touched by the federal government more than everyone else. So. Some people think it's amazing. We were just having a conversation at our table that we have members of Congress ride our system every day, members of NTSB, FTA, FRA, you name it. That is awesome in one way, and obviously the other challenge with that is every single thing is magnified times 10. So an escalator out in DC turns into a massive, Twitter fest all day long, where it might not be in another part of the country. So, but at the same time, I think we consider ourselves America's metro system. We are very important on the national security of America. Like today, we'll probably move, 24,000 people to the Pentagon alone. Obviously, the federal government can't work without us, and let alone the museums, the monuments, and all of that type of stuff. So, like I always say, if you've been to one transit system, you've been to one transit system. There's amazing similarities between us all, and there's just drastic differences. And I encourage everyone, when you go to compare something, be very careful how you're comparing things. It's easy to cherry pick the data point to get your own argument. There's people that are anti-transit that cherry picked data against us a year and a half ago when we were doing our budget. Why can't you be more like Chicago? Then I see on Twitter, people in Chicago, why can't you be more like DC? And it's all context, and I'll just tell you, I love Chicago. I think you have an amazing regional network here, something you should be proud of, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for covering the comparative question before I got to ask it. Because
I should have paid attention to our prep.
No, it's good. I was going to say, what about efficiencies and things like that, which we'll get into later with the funding stuff, where we get compared all the time. Moving to Andrew, MTC has a pretty large role, not just with transit, but the larger transportation network. If you could give us your background into how you are positioned in the Bay Area, that would be very helpful.
Look, I think the best way to start is really to give you all an orientation on the Bay Area. We are home to about 8 million residents. We represent 9 counties that surround the Bay itself. We're made up of 101 different cities, and they're of all different kinds of sizes and shapes. Transit in the Bay Area, I think everybody, as Randy said, has a unique system. We have 27 different transit operators, and actually if you boil that down to some that are still starting up, we probably are heading to 30. And I do not recommend that that's a great model, but that's how we're set up. Our big commuter rail, like Randy's, is BART. It really is the linchpin of how transportation works in the region, and it's also the one that is most challenged. We have Caltrain, which is a commuter rail system along the peninsula, and then all kinds of different bus operators, including Muni, which runs the most people, and that's in downtown San Francisco. We really do have a close working relationship. I was struck by a lot of things that Leanne mentioned. I think I could have almost repeated the same storyline in terms of how we work with the region's transportation community. We don't own anything, but we run a lot of things. We, in a lot of ways, act as the umpire and facilitator, which in a lot of ways makes us the target for when things don't go well. And yet we don't have, back to the microphones, much of the power really that's required to maybe make some big, real differences. We do focus energy on a lot of the same three things that Leanne mentioned. And similar to the Chicago RTA, we are the designated recipient for FTA funding, so we do have a role in that space. And then we administer a bunch of other state and regional money that comes through, including bridge toll money, which is pretty unique for us as we manage the toll program for the San Francisco Bay Area. In addition to those roles, we're also the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So in that capacity, we're responsible for planning, funding, and really coordinating all aspects of transportation and housing for the region. In California, our regional transportation plans are tied to the housing plan, and so we need to make them work together in order to reduce the greenhouse gas reductions that are required by at least current federal and a lot of state law. As I mentioned, we also have this unusual capacity of a joint venture with the state of California in managing the 7 state-owned toll bridges. We generate through those tolls, about half of the toll goes to regional transit, capital, and operations investment. The rest of it goes to keep the bridges in working order. So that gives us at least some opportunity with very clean local money to make good investments. In addition to managing the toll program, we also run the Clipper program. So as you know, the venture program is much like our Clipper program. That has really turned out to be a real benefit for commuters and for people, the residents, in order to assist in how they get around the Bay. We think that's a tool for us in the future to really deal with one of the 3 elements that was talked about in the first session, and that is a seamless transportation environment for the customer. So there's a real incentive because they don't have to think about the complications of it. One of the other challenges that we're facing is as we head into our fiscal reality of about a $700 million annual shortfall starting in 27, we've identified what we call a regional transportation, a regional network management system that's really designed to focus on how do you create a system that is seamless, where you don't understand that you're crossing boundaries of 27 different operators, and that you really know how easy it is to get to point A to point B. It's a relative similar time, but a definite cost savings for you if you can do so. And of course, you're doing what we need to do for the bigger picture of cleaning up the environment. So I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. Since you have the mic, I had a follow-up question that takes us into funding, where we'll focus a little bit, and then come back to Randy on some of the DC budget situations that worked out last year. Andrew, you just talked about the toll, which is why I was interested in just jumping right into how that's sort of unique. We don't have that here, that you can devote some of the funding from tolls towards transit. What have been some of the impacts since COVID, and how big is it a big part of the solution of Bay Area's fiscal cliff or not?
Yeah, that's a complicated question, as I mentioned, even in the governance structure. So with the state-owned toll bridges, we do have some flexibility for generating revenue, but we're also very mindful of the fact that operations of transit can be a big sucking sound, and if you overcommit to that investment, you really run the risk of really kind of destroying the balance of the program. So what we have right now is a toll structure that's $8. $4 of it goes into keeping the bridges in good operational shape, and about $4 goes to other improvements. Now, most of that money goes to a very specific list of capital investment projects. that are designed to reduce transit or reduce traffic on the bridge corridors themselves. Now, that gives us a lot of flexibility because if you're familiar with the Bay Area, you'll know that the bridges are really essential to get around the Bay. And so finding regional investments work for us throughout our system, and we're able to invest broadly in transit capital when necessary. When it gets to operations, we have a capped amount of about 40% of some of the dollars that we collect that can go to transit operations, and it primarily goes to ferry and bus operations across the bridges. And we have been very mindful of trying to stay within that box and not allow it to grow. The other challenge that we actually have in that space, which is real, is the cost in investing and keeping those bridges open and operational. So we actually are going through and got commission approval to raise bridge tolls over the next 5 years, another couple of dollars to deal with the capital investment program on the bridges themselves. The bridges do run buses, the trains go around them, but we also know that in order to keep them in shape and not have to try to replace them, we've got to be really serious about that investment. So that's where our thinking is right now.
Thank you. It is a unique program. Moving into funding more specifically with the operating fiscal cliff, you just heard we have a $771 million gap in our region. Our agencies have stretched the federal dollars since 21 that we haven't gone to the state even once since then. Since you became the head of WMATA, there's been a significant sort of change that has come with it, and you've been successful in getting funding in a very complicated structure of DC that you were talking about. What were some of the goals and strategies that you pursued that led to the eventual success, and what is the next step after that?
Yeah, well, thank you. So listen, I've been in transit my whole career, so it's like literally all you do is talk about budgets and funding, and then at night you talk about trains and buses, and it should be the opposite, unfortunately. I think we've lost our way of what we actually do versus projects and whatnot. So what we're trying to ground our agency in is service delivery. So you know, as I kind of talk about when I got there, we had a projected, forecasted $750 million deficit. One of the big messages that I tried to work really hard with our board and then external stakeholders is really making people fundamentally understand the cheapest thing you can do in transit is run more service. It's the only thing that we exist to do. It's like building a $100 million library and having 2 hours a week that you can check out one book, right? Once you buy the trains and buses, run the hell out of them. That's what we're supposed to do. So variable versus fixed cost, I think, is the real thing that we worked on, getting people to understand. We already spent $100 billion on all the assets. Are we really now going to save $12 to run something? And obviously I'm being a little facetious, but generally that is what we do. We're an expensive infrastructure system, and then it's cheap to run service, right? So an extra hour of service costs you very little, but then when you got to make major cuts, you have to cut deep to the bone because there's nothing else to balance it, right? So 70% of our cost is labor, and I bet you, I don't know the rest, but I bet you CTA is probably within a couple points of the same thing, right? So what we did is we said, okay, we got to self-own, and we started really trying to look for efficiencies, and over the last 2 years, we've identified over $500 million of efficiencies, half it on probably operating, half it on capital, and those are reoccurring savings, and that's everything from like every non-rep employee and every union employee last year, in this fiscal year, took a zero. And that saved us $38 million in 1 year. And then obviously the compounding impacts of especially the CBA are massive. So that's all the employees had to sacrifice. We raised fares 12.5%. It needed to happen. We needed to keep up with some basic inflation, right? Everything else in the world can't go up 100% and fares don't change. So fares went up, so customers had to put in their 2 cents. We had to cut things like consultants, which Metro had a little bit of a trans-industrial consultant complex going on, and I'll need a job one day, so I can't hurt on them too much. But I think our industry would do that. We're trying to modernize and drive technology very much. Metro has been a confederation of departments for a long time, and we're really trying to centralize how we do a lot of tech stuff. And then the 3 states stepped up, and I had to work. So in Virginia, we have a Republican governor and a Democrat House and Senate. In Maryland, all Democrat, but clearly 2 different types of situations. In D.C., they're Democrat officially. So you got this complex thing going on there. All 3 stepped up and did about $460 million on the operating budget, and it's tagged to a 3% indexing. Where we're left now is on the capital side. And the capital side in 2019, Metro got a $500 million capital lift, which sounded great, but it wasn't indexed. So we've already lost over about 25% of the purchasing power since 2019 because supply chain and inflation has just, especially on the capital construction stuff, has gone through the roof. So now there is a general acknowledgement across all 3 states that the indexing was a problem. So now we're working on that. We drove this big thing called DMV Moves, where we brought all the states together and really trying to be open and transparency. One thing I've been really concentrating on is just transparency. Here is the data. Here are the facts. What do you want to get for your money? So one, the agency owns responsibility for running things more efficient every day. Now the difference is I might want to run things more efficient so I can run more service. Now you get into a policy debate of once you're more efficient, what to do with the extra. But we own that. 2, the customers had to step up and pay a little bit more, and part of that was fare evasion. Fare evasion was completely out of control in DC 2 years ago. I mean, so on rail side, we reduced it by 82%. No one was paying fares. I will say, being out in the system here a little yesterday, bus fare compliance here, I would love to have the bus fare compliance that you have compared to what we have. We're working very hard on it, but that shows you do have a good transit culture of people realizing that they have to pay for what they get. All those things together is how we got through the operating cliff. And I think we're on a pretty good projection now. We're operating cliff. And now the capital side is by 29, we are in a big problem. But hopefully we can continue to build consensus around solving that.
Thank you. Yeah, we get the same questions here about whether it's efficiencies or fare evasion, and comparatively, I've heard that our region has been very consistent in low fare evasion generally, even though you might see a video on social that someone did it, but the percentages are fairly...
Don't believe everything you see on Twitter.
Correct. But thanks for amplifying that. I wanted to switch gears in funding to a little bit more specific thing. We have heard a lot of suggestions of how you could just help yourselves, especially in tough budget years. But the scale of the gap since COVID it's pretty large for all of us. And I think with some of the work WMATA has done in joint development of real estate on transit properties, I wanted to focus a few minutes on that. That's something RTA is about to embark on with CTA, Metra, and PACE to see if this is even feasible for us. But also, then there's the San Francisco Bay Area side where you have control, or not control, but real estate is part of it goes hand in hand, and BART has had some authority. So just wanted to get your thoughts on real estate development and other system-generated sources of revenue that may be creative, but what level of impact are they having, and what value do you see in these initiatives?
Yeah, I think a great question. So one, you're always going to have people, I guess rightfully, hope that there's a silver bullet to solve expensive public services, right? It's kind of like schools. There's no silver bullet to schools, and the fire department never gets questioned. Have you ever noticed that? The fire department never gets questioned? That's the best. And the Pentagon. The Pentagon keeps going up for some reason. But anyway, a little aside. So for real estate, we have a pretty sophisticated strategic real estate program, and a whole plan behind that. We have an enormous amount of land in the DMV. Now, most of that land is parking or kind of transit-adjacent facilities. So we probably have 5 in development right now. We've done a bunch. Are they really good to do? Yes. Are they more valuable for the agency or the municipality? I would say the municipality by far, because really all our job is to create activity and tax base. So there are people gaining some tax base from stuff around metro stations, but it's like, just to be frank, it's a rounding error of the budget. There's no way if Chicago pulls off real estate solving your transit problem, everyone's going to come and study it for the future of time, because it's just not possible. So it might end up being like 0.5% or 1% of something there, but I think the real value is it's the community building. You're creating tax base, you're creating housing, you're creating an ability for someone to live near transit without a car or go from a 2 to 1 car family. There's so many intrinsic or adjacent values around transit-oriented community that really are not about solving the transit agency's budget stuff. It's how they all sync together. That's at least from, and I've done this now at 3 agencies, so I've yet to see. We're not Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a real estate agency that runs transit, and it's an island with millions of people. It's just not a comparable kind of thing.
You know, actually, could I add a little bit to that too? You know, the Bay Area perspective, I think, Randy, you put it perfectly. It's not going to ever save transit, but it is so critical to what I mentioned is our North Star, this Plan Bay Area that is all about marrying transportation investments and sustainable communities. That's really the goal. The biggest challenge that we have in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it dwarfs the transit challenge, is affordable homes. And one of the things that we are seeing with sort of the changes in patterns and the commuter kind of not relying so much on the major transit hubs is a lot of the parking areas that were available can now be developed into transit-oriented communities. And while I don't think it's a real moneymaker for BART, who owns a lot of those properties, it is an opportunity to create that experience where you don't need to use a vehicle as much, and you can live and work near a transit-oriented facility. So we think it's a real game changer. We've been actually very successful. You know, policies take a long time to really show up, and so we've been working on our transit-oriented community strategies for decades, and we're starting to see the benefits. And we want to continue to capitalize on it in this new environment. And if we have an opportunity to change things in terms of transit ridership, we really think moving the homes closer to transit is really one of the answers. And then ultimately growing ridership, which I think we all agree is the key to making the systems work well, is what we hope to be the outcome. But it won't be overnight.
Yeah, I just want to add, not overnight. So DC, I mean, a lot of people go in and out of DC, so there's a station, we have a station called NOMA. And NOMA is just if you will, just north of Union Station for kind of layout. That was an infill station that Metro put in, I think, 2004 or 5-ish, give or take. And there wasn't a lot there. There was a lot of parking lots and some abandoned buildings and, you know, a little bit of stuff, right? Like pretty much nothing. And that station, this month, we're now hitting 30,000 people a day ridership out of that station, and there's billions of dollars of economic development around there. Restaurants, hotels, condos, you name it. Navy Yard Station, unbelievable, right? It used to be just surface parking lot, nothing. DOT headquarters, Nats Park, us as the station, and now it's unrecognizable what Navy Yard is, and that kind of volume of people. So it could take a while, but those ones are, but again, Metro didn't get any economics out of that, but our region got economics, and quite frankly, who cares? So if the DC government's getting the property tax, and then they're paying for the service with us, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen the other.
Yeah, it's a really good point of the larger impact transit already has and could have with this. Andrew, anything else to add from your perspective on how the implementation is going with any of the TOD projects around BART or other, especially since COVID, because to your point, these policies take a long time. So the horizon of this immediate funding issue versus any revenue gain down the line is really important for us to understand.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add other than to say it's really our municipalities that have figured out how to invest. You know, the state requires for what they call arena house developments, which is, you know, the housing goals for very specific, with very specific quotas for each of these communities, and they're really struggling to get those built. I would say that maybe unlike the Hong Kong reference, BART is a transit agency that happens to own a real estate division. And so I don't think it's their first nature, and I think they are trying, and we're seeing some wonderful examples of it, in particular at the Lake Merritt BART station in Oakland, where we used to actually share an office with BART. They are now building 100 affordable senior homes on BART property. And as part of one of my other duties, the Bay Area Housing Infrastructure Financing Authority, we're contributing to the loan that allows those apartments to get built. And so, again, you got to kind of count your victories, I guess 100 apartments at a time.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I wanted to switch gears a little bit to service and rider experience. Randy already started talking about it. Before we get into specifics, my first question for Andrew is sort of the MTC's work on fare integration. It keeps coming up here. Again, our riders, when we ask them to prioritize among different options, fare integration comes out closer to the bottom, but it is a good issue in terms of getting more new riders to come to the system who currently may not be riding. And MTC has done a bunch of work in that area, so I just wanted to ask you, especially given coordination with 24+ operators, how the Clipper structure works, and since COVID, what are some of the commitments you are making?
Yeah, thank you for that. There's been a lot of jokes over the years about Clipper being an expensive tool for transit agencies to keep their independent fare structure in place because it allowed us to do things that really mask the challenge of an integrated fare structure. I do think, though, over the course of our, 15 years of running the program, we're starting to kind of see the benefits of creating this more seamless work. And when COVID happened, we immediately took a big hit like everyone else to about, I think ridership was about 14% of what it was prior to COVID. We're now maybe approaching 2/3, somewhere between 50% and 2/3. So it's coming back incrementally. But we consistently hear from the customer that it's just too hard to use, the fare structures are complicated, and so we put a lot of energy into this forward-facing customer relationship, again, reflecting a lot on what Leanne had said in her opening remarks. And what we have tried to do, first of all, is to get all of the transit agencies to think about their customers running through a seamless system. And so regardless of the brand on the operator that they're on, consider themselves really a regional transportation experience. Because I think much like you're having challenges here, our residents don't just reside in one particular county or one particular city to get around. So we started to focus on simple things like what is the definition of a youth? What is the definition of a senior? How can we come up with a system that eliminates expensive transfers that kind of assist in allowing people to not worry about having to make a ride on two different systems? How do we get a message out there so that wherever you go, you can find that station? And we've been investing quite a lot in those elements. And so in the next few months, we're rolling out the next generation Clipper, which is designed to do multiple things. You guys are already there in certain ways with your Venture card, but it'll be contactless, so you can tap with a credit card, which is nice for the tourist and the white-collar deliver-in folks. We have invested quite a bit in what we call the Clipper Start program, which is a low-income fare program that has really been capturing a lot of the must-riders with 50% benefits, much like the senior benefits that are mandated federally. We've also been working quite a bit at getting youth programs set up so that we've realized very quickly that educating the youth on using transit is one of the best ways to build a future ridership growth. And we've got a new program called Clipper Bay Pass, which is really a program that's designed for employers that caps the cost of transportation regardless of what system you're working on. And we're seeing that really escalate the number of transit uses by individuals, even if it's outside of work, which is where we need to capture the new ridership. And so a lot of those tools that are available to us are going to only be amplified in the next generation of Clipper, which is currently being tested. And we really look forward to how that, again, makes the decision to get on transit so much easier. We're adding on top of that certain elements like mapping and wayfinding, again, so that you can really brand the system as a regional program and not a series of multiple operators. And we find that will be effective. I do want to also mention that safety and security are job number one. And so if you follow Twitter or the newspapers, what you'll see is many people have left our transit systems because they don't feel safe. And they also notice how poorly we do in fare collection. because of fare evaders. And so what BART has done more recently is invested in more modern gates, which have done a really nice job of eliminating the fare evaders, just hopping the gates and moving into the system, and maybe not having the same respect that the regular riders have. And then Muni has done quite a bit of stepping up its enforcement, and you're starting to see elements of people coming back to transit that were previously afraid to ride. And then the final thing I would say that's sort of in this same mode, maybe there's two more. One is this mapping and wayfinding, where everything is uniquely identified so that you can go look at a transit stop and recognize what services are there. We have ferries, we have trains, we have light rail, we have buses, and try to integrate them, building mobility stations around there for car share and bike share. One of the other tools that we have at our disposal is we run the Bay Area Bay Wheels, it's called, the Regional Bike Program, which is an MTC program that really assists in that first last mile connection. And then finally, we are working on a lot of bus priority projects that are designed to really change the way the interstate system works and the highway system works, so that buses get some level of priority both through the approaches in some of the arterials, but then continue it on to the mainline bridge corridors and into the major places that they're getting to.
Thank you. There's a lot there from the DC side to add, so I'll let you pick, but there's bus priority and safety and security were the two areas where I wanted to hear from you as well.
Sure, thanks. So, listen, I'm an everyday customer, right? And I use customer very specifically as a term, not a rider, and it's kind of counter to our whole industry. But I look at it as I want to earn people's trips. And that's why I use customer. I don't look at it like a business, because we're not a business. I want to be business-like, but not a business. But I want to earn someone's trip. And the number one thing that people want when they take transit is to feel safe on the system, period. And until that's solved, there's not ridership. And so when I got to DC, I got to be the face of the organization, and yeah, we're safe. There's days where I was like, holy crap, I don't know if I feel safe on here. And then I get home, and I got to listen to my wife tell me. And there's nothing that gets you more motivated outside of being your own customer than when your wife's the customer. Trust me on that one for a long career. But in DC, we had, there's no one was paying fares on bus and trains. We had people smoking weed, smoking meth on trains. There was like homelessness on trains. I think in my first 8 months, we had 6 murders. It was one of my employees got murdered. It was insane. It was just, I think people forget 2 years ago, our entire country was on fire. Like there was just stabbings everywhere. It was kind of crazy, right? And it's clearly got a dramatic pattern. But I said, we are taking this on head on. I'm a big believer that we have large societal issues, but they're not the transit agency's responsibility. We have failings within society around with people that are homeless or unhoused. We have mental health issues as a country. We have other issues as a country. That's not my job as running the transit system. And I put it right back on the other people's responsibility to fix those problems. My job is to move people, period. And I want to do it as equitably and sustainably and as humanely as possible. But that's my job. My job is to teach people and get people jobs and create housing and all that kind of stuff. And I think too much has fallen on the transit systems for decades now. We need to run safe, frequent, reliable service. We do that. Everything else works after itself, right? So crime, last quarter, crime is now an 8-year low on the system, right? Which is incredible change. Fare evasion, 82% reduction in fare evasion, which is not real money. It's making the system safer at the same time. We had our last quarter, I think it was our highest reliability on our heavy rail fleet. We're almost at 50,000 miles between failure. Number one thing that people on trains dislike is getting offloaded for a door failure or mechanical failure or anything else. Our frequencies are fantastic. Right now we're running probably the best frequency in the history of Metro. On our interline sections, we're running somewhere between 3 to 4 minute frequencies. The other thing is we are running great frequencies all day, all days a week. And we got to create a transit system, and I think we've done very well at this, that is not for people that look like me that work in offices only. I want to get people to the office, I want to get people to the doctor, I want to get people to a Nats game, to a Caps game, to a Cherry Blossom Festival, to the airport, to Starbucks, to CVS. I don't care. I want you to use Metro for all of your trips. So we run great service at the peak, off-peak, at night, and on weekends. And we do that on bus and on rail, and that's why we've led the country now for just over 2 years. I think we're at 26 months of leading the country on ridership gain, and we're just going to keep pushing that. So we won an International Cleanliness Award 2 weeks ago for the cleanest public space in the country. So our whole focus is on the customer, and I'll tell you where it's worked out really well. The elected officials, when I got there, and I've been dealing with this stuff for a long time, right? So I literally interact with elected officials every day. The number one way I know that we're doing pretty well on service is I don't hear from elected officials at all about service, because they don't hear from their constituents about service. And to me, that has helped solve most of our funding and issues, is because people now feel good about the system and have trust that we are running the system well with the dollars that, hey, elected officials got to put a lot of skin in the game to take a vote to raise taxes. Right. And I think I owe the responsibility to say, if I'm asking you for that, you got to trust in me that I'm going to make those things work, right? And that's that relationship. And then the customer's got to understand that they're putting skin in the game to raise taxes, usually on a lot of people that don't use the system, and that the agency is going to provide the best service. So that triangle, and I feel like that's where we're in a pretty good spot. Perfect? Absolutely not. We're going to move 1 million people today. We got 13,000 employees. Somebody's going to do something stupid, right? It's just inevitable, including me, probably 15 times. But I think the more honest and transparent we are about the customer service side has been really respected by the elected official side and their willingness to continue to drive the resources needed to deliver the service that the constituents clearly want.
Yeah. I don't have a follow-up to that, but sort of a policy question of how to then answer the question that if there's lower ridership, we probably don't need that much funding, and how.
Did we just talk about fixed versus variable costs?
Yes.
I mean, you got listen. This system is amazing here. Like one thing, I see Jim over there, right? Your regional rail system is here, New York and Boston and Philly are just absolutely incredible assets, right? You have a better regional rail network than we have, that's for sure. I took CTA in from the system yesterday, from the airport last night, right? You got a great network here. Listen, I believe, it's not my right place, maybe I'll die. Chicago's never been funded to the level it's needed to be funded, right? It's just reality. I don't know, I might be getting in trouble now. Leanne might give me the hook. But you have what makes you so competitive, I think, for an economy is your cost of living is way better than places like us. And you got this great network. So at a certain point, does it matter? Okay, so if CTA moved 800,000 today, it's not worth funding because you didn't move 912,000? That doesn't make sense to me. The goal has to continue to drive it back to carrying its mode share. We want people out of individual cars and people actually interacting with other human beings on transit or taking a bike or whatever. I mean, these are pretty obvious things. Now, at the same time, the agency does own the responsibility to spend the money, right back to what I was saying, right? So, anyway, sorry, Leanne, if I got a little, but you guys have a great thing here, and I think, hopefully you all figure it out.
Yeah.
So, it's good to have a partner next to you that has such a limited view of what success is. It just once you get out of the gate, everything's okay. It's not my problem. Yeah. We talked about this a little bit last night. I do think one of the challenges we face is the experience of transit doesn't just end at the gate, and that's one of the challenges. So as you interface with the cities in particular, the ability to make sure that people feel safe getting out of the system through the neighborhood or onto a bike or something that is a lot more sustainable is a challenge. And my commissioners actually are all mayors or board of supervisor representatives for the most part. We don't have a lot of structure that comes from on high from the state of California or the federal government. And so the benefit, I think, in the way we're organized in that sense is my commissioners actually need to worry about sewers, homes, transit, and how it all connects together. And I do think this partnership with the transit agencies on how you make sure that that experience from getting from your home to your office or to the Giants, who are in first place right now, by the way, although I noticed the Cubs are too, so that's good. I don't know where the Nats are.
Rebuilding.
It's 2 weeks into the season. It's hard to talk yet. But anyway, I do think it's important to really pay attention to that whole experience. And I know you weren't really being that declarative about it gets off the system. And I think actually my operators could benefit from your approach. And I think then the partnership starts. Because it is true, a lot of your experience on the train is what drives your willingness to get on that train.
Yeah, and I didn't in any way mean to be I got really into the transit on that one. But like at the end of the day, like I don't control the roads, so our bus service will only really ever get to a higher level with the owner of the road facilitating better bus service, right? I mean, our buses, there's sections of my network we run 3 to 4 miles an hour at peak. That's not a good service. And what it means is I got to keep throwing more buses out there, which just drive way more costs for really no good outcome. So we need our partners who are on the roads. We need partners that, back to development, all of this stuff works together.
Thank you. I think wanted to focus a little bit on DMV moves. I think you're already getting into that, a unified vision for the future. What are you hoping to accomplish next?
Yeah, so we formed this task force called DMV Moves. We've had it now for a year. The goal is probably another 6 months. So it wasn't to solve the immediate crisis that we kind of resolved on our own a little bit. It was to finally, as a region, say what do we want to be as a regional transportation network, transit network, right? And what then ways are we willing to fund that? So there's kind of a couple work streams. There's a funding work stream that purposely we're leaving to the end. Because almost always in my career, everyone goes to the taxing measure or something else. It distracts from the entire conversation. Who cares what mechanism you're going to use if you're not deciding what outcomes you want, right? So we're trying to be outcome focused. Says easier said than done, right? So outcome focused. What do we want for our vision of our transit network? Mostly Metro on some of that. And then the second part on that is how can we organize between all of the operators in the region to a little of these same conversations. So we control the Smart Trip card, but how do we do better fare policy across all of these things? We have a big problem. Half the operators are going fare free. Meanwhile, I'm told you got to go collect every fare. That is a horrible message for our public, right? We got to land what we're trying to do and be kind of some unified approach around that, obviously. And then back to the funding thing. So DMV Moves is made up of us at Metro and the board of the council of government, so COG. First time ever the two agencies got together. We had a shared joint board meeting, formed a task force out of members from our board and theirs, and we have another meeting in 2 or 3 weeks, and it's supposed to be every 2 weeks, every 2 months, there's a big public meeting. It's very public, open to the public, very transparent. It's all elected officials from around the region, a couple of people that are not, but mostly. And then there's a work group, 2 work groups. One is of some advocates, some business groups, labor, things of that nature. And the second one is kind of the government partners, so like chief administrative officers of counties or CFOs in like the city budget office and some of the operators. So the idea is to work through the work streams with them and then big meetings with, and very transparent, and trying to drive this conversation of, some people are like, we need new rail lines here, and other people are like, that's great, this thing's falling apart here. How do you balance those things? How do you drive more use of BRT as an example? I think one of our big future goals here is to drive a lot more bus service, specifically around BRT, real BRT, not fake BRT, real good BRT, and then a lot of high frequency, and then try to move us a little bit more on the automation side, on the rail side, to really enhance safety and overall long-term financial management as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. On the Bay Area side, what are your transit priorities right now?
Yeah, that gets back to maybe our governance structure. Look, I think the Bay Area for a long time has been committed to transit. 85% of our anticipated revenue that goes into our regional transportation and housing plans goes to transit, which is very unusual for the entire nation. And of that, a majority of it goes to keeping the system operating in an order. Fix it first is sort of the mentality. However, there is an appetite for big projects that is insatiable, and all it does in a lot of ways is it exacerbates the problem we're having in operating the existing system. And so I made the joke at the start that we're 27 transit agencies heading to 30, and that's true. We have a new rail system called Valley Link that is taking over where BART left off to bring commuters in from the Central Valley into the east portion of our bay and then connect to BART. We have an extension of a train in the North Bay counties called SMART, the Sonoma Marin Rapid Transit, and it wants to extend to a community of 8,000 in Cloverdale, which is a wonderful community, but 8,000 people and a huge capital and operations expense. Our ferries are very popular, but they're also very expensive to run. They're the most subsidized form of transit. A big push to expand the ferry system, which again is a very small number of ridership. Moving on into the BART system and the Caltrain system and the high-speed rail goals, we have a downtown extension that is now approaching $9 billion to go 2 miles from a train station just out by the ballpark in San Francisco to downtown. It's counting on a lot of federal money that we don't anticipate coming any longer. The final BART extension down into San Jose is approaching $12 billion. And you know, that again is a real challenge to get built and then operate and to find the ridership. So everybody keeps identifying new things to invest in and creating individual sort of organizations to run them, and then competes for the same amount of money. So while our vision is pretty set, and while we do, I think, a lot of the good core structural things in place, we have this credit card that we just can't seem to put away. And it really makes it hard to sort of match the goals of the plan, which is an affordable, connected, diverse community that you live in a healthy, vibrant environment. And so I think while we have some very measurable goals, some very good ways to try to attack them, I think we're also our own worst enemies in sort of the ability to get results that we're looking for. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you did.
I just wandered a little bit, if you don't mind. I feel like I'm in a safe audience.
There's just a lot going on, so thank you for giving us that picture. To wrap up and then leave some room for questions from the audience, which I'm sure many of you will have, if you don't think about them right now. This is your 5-minute warning. To wrap up, what do you think is our role in U.S. transit post-pandemic and moving forward? Where do you see opportunities? We talked a lot about challenges. Where should we go from here?
Yeah, so one, I don't, listen, again, I hope I don't sound controversial. I don't talk about the pandemic ever. It's just not a thing we do at Metro. I don't care about what the ridership was before the pandemic. All I care about is what I do now and what our future is. And I really think we got to stop comparing ourselves to something. I mean, it's kind of it's irrelevant. Today, what happened in 22 on ridership on, I don't know, the red line, right? What matters is what we're doing today and what our goal is in the future. So listen, our country goes through cycles. On the federal level of this support versus that support as an example, or different word choices or different things. I'm convinced our country is going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to urbanize, or certainly inner suburbs densify more, and that's going to lead to the existential problems we have as a country, which is affordability and climate. And, you know, it's maybe some ways you could say climate a year ago differently than you say it today. It doesn't change the fact that climate change is real, and the older we get, it's going to matter more. We have a ton of people in this country that can't afford to live anywhere now, and that's only going to get worse. And the only chance we really have is to be like every other major city in the history of time, which is connect people to transportation, housing, work, and opportunity. So I think the future for us as urban mobility is still actually really amazing. I do think, though, we have to be eyes wide open that our world is moving way faster than we move as an industry and as government, and that's why it's so disruptive the last few months, right? There are a bunch of people, right or wrong, I'm not getting into judging, are used to moving at a pace that our government can't move at. And autonomy is coming, and it's coming real rapidly. And we gotta wake up on that. And we're either going to embrace levels of automation, technology, and sophistication to drive better public outcomes, or we get swallowed up and eaten by them. And I want to actually use them to make better public outcomes. So we already have an AI group working now for over a year. I think we're ripe for high use of technology. And like our maintenance profile, all we do is consume data, and that data is going to lead to enormous efficiencies over time, right? And predictability on trip planning, on bus maintenance, on rail maintenance, on track outages, and everything that you could think about. And if we do that right, the person that wants to take the blue line this afternoon to O'Hare doesn't care what we're doing, but their trip is so much better. And then, back to the other side, the elected official doesn't have to raise taxes as much every time to manage all that. So I think that's where I'm excited about the future, this convergence of true revolution in technology, and the value we provide, to me, is non-debatable. And if we can do it right, we are going to even be more valuable in the future. But we got to move and start moving much faster. And I get worried that we're scared to move at the pace that we need to move for the crisis that we really have as a country.
It's amazing. Andrew, any final words before Q&A?
Yeah, maybe a couple. And look, I agree with everything Randy said, and I don't want to repeat it. But I too, like Randy, am a customer. I take a ferry and or BART every day to get into the city. I ride bike share. I take a lot of our other transportation systems if I'm going around the region. When I travel, I check out the transit of the system. So I too rode the blue line from the Metra or from the airport. And understand the experience about how the Chicago system works. I spent a lot of time. In fact, I do have some money held up in my phone now on my WMATA card.
That's good.
Because he's got a nice, minimum balance, and I only go every so often. But I've got that card in my wallet. We do love float, don't we? Traveling the world, I've experienced all the wonderful systems and the trains that you get into in Europe, and I think we can emulate those models even if we have a long way to go. But I'm focused mostly on the back of this placard that you have on your tables, and the rider experience, I think, is exactly where we need to focus. I started out talking about how our Clipper card was designed to make transit operators feel better about how they collected money. 15 years later, what we're talking about is how do we use those tools to make the customer feel like they've got a really easy system to use and they know how to get from point A to point B. Because I do think this investment is real, and to Randy's point, you can talk about different words, but the fact of the matter is you see these results that if people get out of their cars and into transit, you have a measurable difference in what effect you have on the environment. And I do think that that's a connective tissue that really has to resonate well. I also do think that, this idea of building foundational understanding at the younger age group is so important as, we move into the next generation. If that is the mode of choice that they learn from, they'll continue to build on that. And I really think that that's where the excitement, and that's why I like to come to work every day, to try to really understand what we can do to reach people about using these wonderful transit systems on a more regular basis, and not just under the commute pattern assumption that that's how you use transit. How do you use it in everyday life? And that requires a lot of frequency. It requires cleanliness, seamlessness, and you have to be able to get there in a reasonable amount of time. Maybe not as fast as a car at all times, but in a reasonable amount of time that you feel like you had an efficient trip.
Well, you were the easiest panelists. Thank you so much for coming out here. Please give them a round of applause. I believe we have time for a few questions. A mic will be coming your way for those who raise your hands.
Randy, I enjoy WMATA whenever I get to DC, so thank you very much. But I'm interested in your strategies for two of the things you were just rewarded for, your international cleanliness and your safety. What were strategies that you used to achieve both of those?
Yeah, thank you, and we'll welcome you back next time you're in DC. So on the cleanliness, listen, we have a very high expectation to meet in DC. And one thing that, quite frankly, a lot of people get the benefit of just that are regular transit users is we have to perform at such a high level because our clientele is literally the entire world, if you will, right? One, listen, we're newer than a place like Chicago, so naturally we should be able to keep it a little cleaner, right? But cleanliness is part of kind of the culture. So like a good example, like if I walk through a station and see something, I'm going to pick something up. And that is like kind of built into my team's DNA. Like, why would you walk through the station, see a newspaper or a can and not pick it up, right? Like you wouldn't do that at home. And so there's a pride thing. Is it perfect across all of our employees? No, but that's the kind of empowerment and pride that we're, I think, building culturally. So, we're really always on cleaning. Number two is really I think the security part. So again, if people don't feel safe, then what are we really doing, right? At the end of the day, there's going to be people that have to ride no matter what and are going to have to put up with stuff. That's not right. And then if we need more people back to the system, the only way they're really going to do it outside of frequency and reliability is feel safe. So we have our own police department. Not every transit agency has their own police department. I personally think every transit agency should have their own police department, but I don't know what I should say or not say. I guess I just said it. So, and we have a pretty significant sized police department. Now, mind you, we have a lot of national security stuff that we do that it would be different than in Chicago or other places because of DC. But I have also over 100 special police on top of our police department. All they do is walk trains all day long. They literally go from one car to the next car all day long, back and forth, period. I have lots of police presence in all of our major bus bays, big stops like that. We have plainclothes riding buses and trains. We believe in a lot of visual presence of personnel and security, and it's mattered a lot. And then when we picked up on fare enforcement, I think last year we had over 700 arrests for people with outstanding warrants, fugitive for justice, guns on the system. So point of entry policing in transit is so critical. So if you're not acting responsible to get into the house, then you're not going to generally act responsible in the house itself. Now what we always say is not everyone that fare evades does other crimes, but everyone that commits crime in the system is fare evading. Like 99 point, there's not a lot of people tap, so you know who I am, they're going to commit crime, right? So all of these things working together, but at the same time, we built a crisis intervention team. When I was in Austin running the system, we were the first in the country to do it, and Bar around the same time. So we have about 20 mental health workers that go throughout the system every day, try to get people help and assistance. Again, we want to give people help and assistance they need, but they're not going to stay in our system otherwise. And so we look at it very much as community, kind of that way, police, cops, and cameras. We have well over 30,000 cameras in our system, and we are kind of like the eyes for our region, really keeping an eye on things. So hopefully that was helpful to your question.
And does that funding come out of your transit funding or is it separate?
Oh yes, ma'am, unfortunately, yeah. I make a pitch to the Hill every chance I get.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bill Morton. I'm the president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. I'm representing my constituents today, including Kathy Powers in particular. In my neighborhood, we have two stations that are not ADA accessible. No elevators, no escalators, and we have a lot of different residents who really need them. Kathy Powers is one of them. So we're doing a red line extension here in Chicago, but all of our stations aren't ADA accessible. How do you encounter these kind of financial and logistics issues, and are all of your stations ADA accessible? Both of you, please.
I think all BARTs are.
Yeah, BART's, I guess, 50 years old. It's relatively new compared to Chicago, for sure. So they are ADA accessible. I do think the challenge, though, and Randy mentioned it, is a lot of times we build new things and we forget to do operations and maintenance. And so I think our systems struggle more with reliability. And so I do really take to heart a lot of the comments that Randy mentioned about that. But I will say it's interesting, the whole question of accessibility and how difficult it is to manage the entire landscape is something that we're very aware of. And so we are trying, I think, a different approach region-wide on kind of opening up our ability to listen and kind of really understand how challenging it is, even in an ADA system, to get around and to be able to be assured of where you go. I now have the experience of living with my 91-year-old mother-in-law who is in a wheelchair. And it really teaches you some of the challenges very directly on how it is to get around the system. So my only observation is really that while it's easier to consider ADA accessibility, it's much harder to navigate the entire system from beginning to end. And I think it is something that will always be in front of us. And frankly, it is one of those areas that is not well funded and does come out of the same limited financial pots that we all play with.
Yeah, just quickly on our side, Great Society subways were all built fully accessible really before ADA was even known as a thing, kind of right around the same time, right? We look at accessibility much larger than ADA though as a law. Like, so when I got there, we now have a chief accessibility officer, everything from how you interact with our website or technology, all the way through how your experience is on the curb. So that's why we have cameras on our buses that are ticketing people in our lanes. We want to get buses out of the way, so not only can we speed up the trip, but we can get to the curb. Getting to that curb is much bigger deal for someone with a different need. It also is a big safety factor. So we're kind of looking at accessibility holistically. So as far as the Chicago, the trade-off there, that's a local thing. I wouldn't be right for me to comment on that.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm the Managing Director of McKinley Park Development Council, and we advocate for our neighbors on the southwest side of Chicago. One of the issues that we are working on is last mile accessibility to and from our transit stations. And that includes, and I'm talking about all forms of human-powered transportation, which includes the ADA, thank you. One of the issues we have, for example, is we have sidewalks leading into our primary station that are less than 30 inches wide, and there's giant light poles in the middle of them. So obviously a wheelchair user cannot access that, right? And so one of the things, and we also are working on bicycle access, and I'm wondering how, and crossing state highways and all of the other things that we have to deal with in our industrialized area as it deindustrializes and becomes more residential. So one of the things, my question for both of you is, how are you thinking about bicycle and pedestrian networks as an extension of your service? Because it's not just what happens once you're in the station, which is very important. My father-in-law is a wheelchair user. But also what happens on the way to the station and getting in there, and how you're developing relationships with both community members who are very aware of these things and your sister agencies that have the power to do something about them.
Let me go first. Okay. I go quickly on that is, we own a lot of sidewalks and things of that nature, but obviously those are our local jurisdictions. But in our region, we don't really have. I don't think there's a lot of issues around that. There certainly is in parts of Maryland. The sidewalk is, these places are getting developed and really stuff wasn't there before. So that's how we would decide to locate a bus or not locate a bus in different areas. And so there's some planning, design, construction of that. On the bike part, we have an enormous bike locker program and lots of that type of thing. Quite frankly, I would really, I think the bike network should be part of the transit agency, the share bike. So when I was in Austin, we did that. We brought the local bike share into Cap Metro and ran it as a service. And now it's all integrated ticketing and usership or ridership or bike ship or whatever term we want to use is very high. I think we should be leaning in more of that, where it's just looked at like another mode inside of the operating framework. But different people are doing that a little differently. And part of that is federal regulatory stuff and local stuff and whatnot. So,
I think what I would add, and I need to just sort of remind the audience our role as the MPO and the COG. We tend to operate certain things like the Clipper card and the fast track system, which is our toll system, and like I mentioned, the bay wheels. But most of the work we do in that space is really around policy and making sure that if you want to come after some of the money that we obligate, we have a safe streets policy. We invest a lot in Vision Zero investments. We have seen an incredible uptick in bike and active transportation work. And it's been incredibly successful in really kind of moving the needle. You know, we used to get the bike community speaking at almost all of our events, and they were sort of aggressive, and it was very adversarial. Over the years, as they've become a lot more sophisticated and they've learned our language and they've learned you know, how to really support policy development in a positive way, they've become an incredible vehicle for seeing how far active transportation investments can go to really, again, support this big capital and operations investment that we make in transit. We also have been trying to recognize the fact that our system is much broader than just the transit system itself. And so in my shop, we have centralized what we call the regional network management work, which is under one particular office in my unit, and they handle our highway investments with the state of California, with the local city municipalities, the condition of the pavements. We do a lot of support and technical assistance in that space, and the same thing with the active transportation investments as well. So again, our role really isn't as an owner-operator to try to figure it out, but it's to try to make sure that people are educated on what needs to be done, and then really make a lot of the transportation investments contingent on making those investments so that that transportation, you know, system is as seamless as possible. And you see it all the time. In particular, where I try to focus a lot of my team's energy is just navigating a construction project from some other agency, because what you'll find mostly in the construction projects, they forget about that last connective piece, and it goes out of service for potentially years while, you know, residents are trying to navigate the system. So a lot of ours is really around policy setting and education, and less about the actual implementation. But that's just the nature of our agency more so than anything else.
We have time for one or two more questions. Three. Okay.
Hi, my name is Maggie Trevor. I am the 9th District Cook County Commissioner, and my district goes from the northwest suburbs through the northwest side of Chicago and then down to the western suburbs. And I also spent 15 years living in the Bay Area, most of it near the MacArthur BART station. And one of the things that really, first of all, one interesting aspect of my district is, since it covers both city, near suburb, and farther northwest suburbs, is that there's a really big difference depending on where you live in my district, how well you're served by public transportation. And I think a lot of that is a function of the fact that a lot of the infrastructure for Chicago, the Chicago area's transit system was laid out over 100 years ago. But having lived in the Bay Area, one of the things that struck me is that how new, particularly with BART, but how new the transit system was. It dated from the 60s and 70s. And something else you mentioned I want to follow up on. You talked about the appetite in the Bay Area for large capital projects. And just in the 10 years or so since I left the Bay Area, you mentioned several projects I'd never even heard of before. We don't seem to have that appetite here, and, you know, and that's reasonable. It's like we're working with limited funds, and we're trying to keep a very large transit system operating. You also mentioned that the finances are a little bit difficult with it. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the credit issues that you're having, and also how this transit cliff that you're facing, it might be affecting your perspective on you know, large capital projects, or whether or not you see a future for large capital projects in the transit systems that you manage.
Yeah, you know, it's a complicated question. Apparently you were listening, so I guess I got to be careful about that. Maybe I should be less clear. You know, when it comes to what I'll call the mega projects, we really have tried to put a lot of energy in, right from the get-go, get invested in good risk management policies. So we have been trying to make these big capital investments for a long time, so they aren't a surprise. The BART to San Jose has been on the books for 30 years. And, you know, it's now just coming to fruition. But we have recognized over the years that, you know, if you don't pay attention to the cost, scope, and schedule of projects, they go out of bounds very quickly, and they only take money from the next project. And so trying to make sure that the region is focused very deliberately at the start of a project development process, so that you don't make bad decisions in design that then just get worse during construction has been one of the things we've tried to do. Now, I say that's aspirational more than actual, because getting back to what I mentioned over on the previous question, not owning any of this, we're challenged by our ability to control some of these investments because we are sort of a limited partner. And that's really where this relationship with the bridge toll money comes into play. So a lot of our projects, these big capital projects, are funded by the bridge toll investments. And we learned some lessons when we rebuilt the new San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge that had to do with this whole concept of how you manage a capital project. And we were very successful late in the game at delivering the project on the final schedule and the final budget. But it was after the fact that the MTC, or the Bay Area Toll Authority, got involved in the project, legislation got set up, and we were edicted to really be a joint venture with the state of California, who was responsible for the contracts. We were responsible for the budget, and we needed to focus very clearly on a deadline and a budget. And like I mentioned, we were successful in doing that. We have tried to replicate that in most of our other major capital investment projects and have had some reasonable success in moving the needle. So the best advice I have in that space is to really work with all the different folks that are developing these mega projects and try to change the paradigm of historical delivery and be successful in that element. The second place maybe is sort of around the financing question that you asked. We've also been very successful at sort of managing our debt portfolio relative, again, to the bridge program. We have about $10 billion in debt on our toll bridges. A lot of it came from capital expenditure around building those transportation infrastructure projects on the bridges themselves, but a good portion of it came in the transportation capital investment for transit. And in that place, we do have the ability to have a lot more levers and controls over how that money is managed and how is it spent. And trying to get the region to sort of work under that philosophy is key. Maybe the last piece, and hopefully I'm answering the question well, is really paying attention to what other folks are doing around the nation. So the invitation to come out here was well received by me in particular, because as I move around the nation doing these kinds of things, I like to pay attention to what others are doing in this space. And I know you said you're not doing a lot of big capital investments, but it seems to me somebody's talking about moving your football stadium, and that has a very big connection to transit. And my only advice would be stay downtown.
One final question.
So the average bus speed in Chicago is 9 miles per hour. The divvy bikes can get you to 20 miles per hour. Someone, I think it was the gentleman from San Francisco, you mentioned that some of the buses are at 3 to 4 miles per hour. I hate, in all caps, taking a CTA bus because of how slow it is. And I know that the technology to speed up buses has been around for quite some time. So I'm wondering what kind of arguments you have tried to make either with city officials or state officials to get that buy-in. Another issue I believe we have here in Illinois is that buses cannot ticket moving cars. They can ticket the parked cars in the bike lane, but if someone is driving, or excuse me, the bus lane, if someone is driving in the bus lane, that person will not receive a ticket. And the last time it was brought up in the Illinois legislature, the legislators were worried that too many people would receive tickets and were less concerned about the impact on transit efficiency. So if you can speak to that, I would absolutely love that.
Sure, I guess I'll give it a, I think I heard what you're frustrated with really slow buses. Yeah, I think it's I hear that a fair amount. So one, I think that the number one, on the law part, listen, that's a state thing, right? So we got ours fixed the right way, which is, and we don't actually, so like in Metra, we don't collect any ticket revenue. All the ticket revenue goes back to the local jurisdiction. So, and I'm happy with that. So I'm just the conduit for the ticketing, and they process all of the tickets and collect the revenue. right? All I care about is people getting out of my bus lane and getting out of my bus stop so my customers have a safe, accessible way to use the service. And quite frankly, if we're going to have a bus lane, shouldn't we all agree to have nobody in it? I mean, otherwise, what's the sense of doing it, right? Take that away. I think what I would encourage if it's not done here, which I can't imagine you haven't done some of this, which is kind of like demonstration or pilot, and then it basically gets the fear dealt with, which ends up being nothing, and then you can get into permanent. So we had a pretty significant red line shutdown last summer, and when we do big bus shuttling for our summer shutdown, and the state of Maryland and DC, but this was mostly in Maryland, gave us a dedicated bus lane across, was it 9 miles, I think is where, it might have been 12, but certainly we ended with 9. We did this pilot shuttle for, say, 10 weeks. Literally nothing happened, right? So every NIMBY in the world freaked out, my whole world's gonna fall apart, right? Nothing actually happened, because it's just traffic, it's water, it just moves around. More people got on the bus speeds improved dramatically. We increased bus service on that one route by almost 1,000 people a day. And then we extended it for a couple more months, and I will say the Maryland Department of Transportation and Montgomery County were really good partners in this. We all got together, did a little extension. It was kind of a wink-wink in one way, and then now we got a permanent bus lane. And service is dramatically faster. The other thing that we've noticed significantly in the DC market is wherever bus lanes happen, pedestrian safety incidents go down dramatically, and car crashes, not accidents, because these things are crashes. Accidents don't exist, and all this is engineered in policy decision, right? So all the car crashes went down by, I think it's like 40, 50% on our major bus corridors. Everywhere where you put buses, the real battle is, in my opinion, is not taking the lane from cars, it's taking it from parking. Parking is always this thing, and it's always going to be somebody owns a business. Like I own a dry cleaner in my world, and the reality is, once the data shown that 80% of the people that go to that business actually are on their feet or on wheels, it really changes people's perception of where they think the money is driven for these local businesses. So, again, it goes back to, and I know there's some in the room, but the elected officials ultimately have to do the hardest thing. And my advice, it looks like we're getting to the end here, is advocates need to do everything they can to help those elected officials with those tough decisions, not just pound on them that they won't make the decisions, right? That is a very hard thing to do because there's other constituents. And so the more you can rally support in a positive way to crawl, walk, run, I always say, like Heather worked with me in DC, I've used that before, but crawl, walk, run, that's a nice way of getting under the tent, showing things that can happen. Everyone gets a little bit more space and runway. Magically, you can get something done. So, I would really encourage you to work as best you can with your elected officials and advocate for trying stuff and getting them to get that comfort level versus just, I see a lot of people pound on elected officials that won't go all the way on something all the time and trying to, because they have to make that real tough decision.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any solutions for you other than a lot of sympathy. And again, some of it springs from the challenge of not owning any of the infrastructure that we're talking about.
Going back to that.
I know.
That's awesome.
Maybe I want to own
That's
something.
awesome.
I don't know. I own my own building. How's that? But we work very closely with the state of California and the Highway Patrol to try to convince them that bus on shoulder makes sense on the interstate system. We're actually developing a series of improvement projects for bus priority on our major bridge corridors, and that is the interstate system. It's 580 and 80 in the Bay Bridge corridor, and there's a reluctance to really even try that. So I think Randy's advice is right. Learn by doing was my college motto at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo. And it really is, I think, the best way that you can show folks how something could work at scale. I think the other challenge is really one of these challenges we talk about all the time and we've talked about all day today, and that is limited resources. And as you get into the arterials, which are really the bread and butter for local bus service, and the real reason to get in a bus is from your house all the way into wherever it is you're going, the freeways in the post-COVID environment are actually operating better than the arterials are today. And investment in bus priority means local cities need to make those investments in their infrastructure. If you were paying attention to my introduction, I have 101 cities, and those cities range from 5,000 or 6,000 to 1 million, and they all have different levels of technology, very different levels of ability within their own infrastructure to manage that work. And it's just a gigantic challenge at the end of the day to try to figure out how you get these systems to communicate in a way that's effective both for safety and priority. On the flip side, though, we have seen some incredible successes. There's a bus line that is a true bus rapid transit where the bus has a dedicated lane on Van Ness Avenue, which is 101 in downtown San Francisco. And it fought a lot of resistance. It faced a lot of the challenges that we have in capital construction. There was a lot of NIMBYism around it. It took away parking. I fully agree with that sentiment. And it was delayed and overrun in terms of building the project. But now that it's underway, Muni has had incredible ridership gains because the bus priority gives it all of that consistent ridership knowledge. So you know how long that bus is going to take to get from one end of the corridor to the next. And so, again, I remain optimistic that we've got some real good tools out there, AI included. I am reluctant to say that we're effectively using them all, and I'm reluctant to say that we haven't a simple enough governance structure in all of our major metropolitan areas to be successful very quickly. But I think we can get there someday.
I guess we have one last question, and then we are moving on.
Well, thank you. And you always got to be aware of the last question. But very quickly, a lot of discussion about the rider experience and the integration of fare structures. And my question is, as you put together integrated fare structures, here we have Metra, but it's still a different animal between Metra and I think the other systems. When you put together an integrated fare structure, does that increase your revenue or does it cost your revenue?
Locally, I'll say that the fare policies underlying those structures end up costing the individual agency a little bit of money because there'll be a discount to the rider if it's based on policy. So that's where the COVID relief money has allowed CTA, Metra, and PACE to do a lot more in that area because we are not balancing it out with the fare recovery ratio and other issues we have. But it does cost quite a bit of money on the technology, procurement, and that side of the house. But I'll let you guys.
Yeah, I guess my sense would be the rider experience. If the rider experience is made up of 10 things, I think the fare policy stuff is 1 out of 10. And the other 9, I do think matter more. And if you look at every survey that's ever been done in the history of people that use transit, fare is usually the last thing they talk about. They want safe, frequent, reliable service, period. So you can make fares dirt cheap, and if the bus comes every 30 minutes, no one cares. And on and on and on, right? So I would really say the 9 out of the 10 things are the real rider experience. Now, that one thing, I think the answer to your question could be yes and no. So depending on the combination of agencies, yeah, you could lose revenue. On the other hand, you could gain ridership and how you structure it. So a good example, we are working around this larger concept of the DC market. So all the local bus agencies already use our fare product, kind of like Clipper, so that's all managed well. But the 2 railroads do not. And a good example would be if someone was coming from a certain part of Virginia and they want to go to National Airport, they're going to get off, switch, get on our line, and use 2 different tickets. At a certain point, someone's like, I'm going to take Uber, right? And especially if there's 3 people that have to do that, now you're like, I already bought 1 car, right? So I think that's that part that is really the most valuable, which is how to get, we launch open payment in next month. We want to get more and more people that are kind of almost friends and family style. So if the 3 of us are going to a Nats game or whatever, 1 Uber is $20, but if we all have to get on, then that's complicated. How do we link all that together? So I think that's that future kind of like being more iterative on fare policy versus just winners and losers. Does Metra lose $5 and TTA gains 2? I think that's, in my opinion, the wrong way to look at it. I'm trying to get people at home not to look at it that way. We care about the community spend and the community value, and the biggest value is getting more people on the assets we already pay for.
Yeah, look, I like that answer a lot. I would also say, if you take a look at the economics, it's kind of interesting. It depends on what level of the economics you're looking at. If it's micro, then it probably is more expensive. But fare revenue is one of the least expensive costs or revenue generators in our system. And so bringing it back twofold would be very good, but it doesn't solve our problem overall. And I want to reflect back on what Randy said. You know, the fixed cost of running your system is so much the critical aspect of what you're investing in. Getting more people in those carriages is how you're successful. And it almost doesn't matter how much revenue you're collecting in addition to it. Trying to get maximum use out of that so people have a reason to get out of their car into that mode of transportation is so much more beneficial when you look at the macro environment that I would say it's really not worth thinking about. It's almost a rounding error, I think you mentioned. At the end of the day, when you talk about the impact that you have on some of the greater goals that you have as a region. Now, we are very car-centric in the Bay Area, even though we invest in all this transportation or transit systems. And so a lot of our fare box recovery is so low that it doesn't even matter that much around the ultimate solution. But we know the transit solutions are the right solutions for moving more people and for getting this mode shift we're looking for so desperately, that we haven't really focused too much on the macro or the micro cost of giving these benefits. Again, we focus more on how do you grow that ridership while trying to keep a balance. We're not ignoring the importance of fare revenue. But I do think if you take a look at the mathematical calculation, it's such a small component of what we're truly investing in. It's getting that rider into that vehicle that's the way you get your investment back. I mean, you think about the cars, right? Your trains probably cost, like ours, $3 million a car or more. Buses are now, especially clean energy buses, are, one, if you can find them, they're multiple millions of dollars. And so, you talk about that investment, how do you put people in it to get
once you're in, the whole game is just, we got to get people in these to use it. Otherwise, don't build it. It's like, I think that's and since we've already built it, we might as well maximize it. So.
Well, thanks again so much for being here. We will have a little break.
Thank you, Maulik, and thank you, Randy and Andy, and thanks for all the great questions. Love the audience engagement. We'll have more of that coming up. We're going to take a 15-minute break, start the next panel discussion at 3 o'clock. Remember, savetransitnow.org to take action if you haven't already. We also have an activation station table in the hall where you can record a short video about why you value the transit system. So we will be back in 15 minutes. So we talked broadly about the national landscape. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into the Chicago regional system with a panel of the executive directors of RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE. So I will pass it off to Leanne.
Thank you, Kyle. As Kyle said, I'm Leanne Redden, and I was chatting with you earlier. I think what we're going to do is kick off a panel amongst our 3 local CEOs about what they've been doing and what their plans are for the future should we be successful in obtaining additional investment into the transit system. I think we heard some great comments from our colleagues from Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. I think we heard a lot of things, similar challenges that we're facing in our region. We heard some of the successes that they've had, and I think actually you'll probably hear from some of these guys that they're doing some of the same things as well, and perhaps it's not necessarily breaking through all the noise that happens in a busy urban area. We have done, I think, individually amongst sort of one-on-one to agency and across all four of us, a lot of coordination, collaboration. And I think, though, that that is not just amongst the transit agencies, but it is also with our local municipalities that many of us work with transportation agencies across the region. And I think that that's important for us to sort of, we use that, I think, as a foundation from which we are looking to build for future investment into the transit system. So we wanted to just sort of start off by talking a little bit, and we'll kind of just run down the line a little bit about some of the enhancements and coordination and improvements that you have each made in the last couple of years as we've been sort of bringing back ridership, bringing back new services, getting creative. And then we can talk more about sort of future investments. So we might just, it's probably just as easy to kind of run down the line. But I think one of the things I wanted to highlight, that some of the stuff that RTA has kind of helped lead and coordinate with the three operators, is some things in the fair policy space, delivering a fair access program across the region. And that's, the primary partnership is with Cook County and Metra and us on expanding a reduced fare program across the entire Metra system, which covers all 6 counties, and allowing people that are experiencing low incomes to actually be able to ride and access the transit system for a cheaper fare. Our goal would be to expand that with additional funding across all 3 operators. We post legislation a couple of years ago, collectively implemented a fare program for people that are survivors of and recovering from experiencing domestic abuse. So we stood up a program within, I think it was 60 days, and got those cards out to people and the associations, the organizations that they work with. So I think we work hard to try to prove that we can deliver on things when the resources and the opportunities are there. We do a lot of work, all of us, in the TOD space, working with communities and municipalities to better leverage the resources that not just in the transit system, but the local municipalities have, and how we can actually look to build better communities and ultimately still generate ridership. But with that, there were just a few things sort of from the RTA kind of standpoint, and I'll turn it over to Jim, who can talk a little bit about some of this stuff. Jim, the CEO of Metra.
Thank you, Leanne. Again, Jim Derwinski, CEO of Metra. Been with Metra 29 years, been railroading 32 years. Very familiar with the industry that I have to operate in. I wish I had a DOT that paved my roads, but we actually have to work on the National Railway Network, and it's the most complicated in the country, perhaps one of the top 5 in the world. So get to work with 6 Class 1 railroads on a daily basis, 3 short lines, and Amtrak in this thing we call the network here. And sometimes I heard that earlier panel, and they were incredible to come in again, and just all the things they talked about really remind me that we're all trying to solve, across this country, we're all trying to solve the exact same problems. And sometimes the limitations on how we get these things done are very similar. Sometimes it's legislative, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's infrastructure. But we're all trying to solve the same problems and really make the passenger experience the best for everyone, regardless, just with those limitations in place. But to your point, Leanne, some of the things that we've really done since the pandemic occurred, and I don't like talking about the pandemic either, but it was an eye-opening day on April 9th, 2020, when our ridership fell 97.5%. And when I say that to people, I think that's an award Metra really didn't want to win. But from that, we actually have really climbed back in a different mindset. First thing we did was reduced expense. We actually cut service in half. We said we can't just keep running trains with barely anyone on it. I know it was going to be painful to the riders, and I know it was going to be painful to the system. We did not lay people off during that period of time. We found other things for them to do. But as we rebuilt, we really looked into what's called regional rail. And regional rail is something we're working towards. It's more frequent service, clock-face service, where services will meet each other. You get off one train, you necessarily aren't going to walk across the Union Station to go to the train that just left 5 minutes ago. So it's matching schedules with the infrastructure in place, not necessarily sometimes always a one-seat ride, but definitely using schedules and the infrastructure to build more of a regional network. You know, Randy talked about how this is an envious area. We have so much here, and Melinda will talk about how big we are. We're bigger than Delaware and Rhode Island put together when you look at our footprint, and that's part of the challenge. Another thing that we did was we really looked at the fairs. We did everything in the beginning of the pandemic time, and when the federal relief money that came in that's going to run out next year, causing this cliff, we did a lot of things with the fair products. And one of the biggest things we did, other than some promotional passes, some free weekends here, and things of that nature, it was we actually took our complicated 10-zone system and we reduced it down to 4 zones. A lot of different reasons we did that. Simplicity of use, better ability for the conductor to get through the train, helps limit somewhat if we have fare evasion going on, and just makes it so that from a user standpoint, it's simpler. And that is a building block on eventually what we all really want here, which is a regional type pass in the system. But being a distance-based system next to 2 time-based systems was a challenge. And I think finally, it was touched on a little bit earlier, one of the things Metra really got into was the onboard cleanliness of the trains, the air circulation, and all the concerns that we had a few years ago, and really trying to take that moment in time and take maybe where we had skimped a little too much on not having enough coach cleaners or not giving the coach cleaners enough time to combat the dirt that gets built up over time, and we built systems in place where we could just pull cars out of service, put high pressure washers inside the cars, deep clean them like they only get cleaned when they go through a rehab. And we've really been trying to maintain that level of cleanliness coming out of the pandemic into the period that we're in now. With that, I'll hand it over to my colleagues here. Nora?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nora Leerhsen, the acting CTA president, and it's great to be here. It kind of feels like a little bit like a transit wedding. I feel a little underdressed, but it's great to be here talking about this and hearing from so many different stakeholders. Over the last few years, I think first and foremost, our success is our hiring. At CTA, we've hired over 5,000 people in 2 years. It took a massive effort in terms of job fairs and engagement and improving our application processes to make that easy. That came, of course, in response to workforce shortages caused by COVID that were drastic and severe and that were seen by our customers in our service delivery. And we worked so hard and aggressively for that time to bring our schedules back. And I know I certainly think some arenas, it's time to stop talking about the pandemic. My one hesitation in saying that is our employees. I think it's important to recognize into the future the work that they did during that time and the way that they showed up. It's a lot of the story that we live every day with these employees, and I think transit employees are often forgotten in that story. They are emergency workers. They are take on all of these issues that so many people forget, and that time was so important. So I think it's important to recognize it for that reason. I'd say we're also at a forefront where we're looking differently at our region and our riders. We've launched CTA's first ever strategic plan, as well as a bus vision study to look at our bus network for the first time in decades. You know, as transit agencies, we sit in a really interesting spot to observe people's movement patterns, and in this new environment in particular, we have a lot of information that other people don't have about what's happening and the nuances very subtly across our region. And so these plans are exciting for that reason as well. And my hope is they're signaling to the public that we are open for engagement and feedback. We want to hear about your experiences on CTA. We want to work to improve them. We know by and large what people want, but we want to know also particular travel patterns and how they might be changing and how we can best serve them. And that happens, you know, we're going to talk and have talked a lot about coordination across our agencies. That occurs. I think that it's important to also think about where funding caps off that coordination in a way where there's more opportunity if we got more funding for further coordination and service coordination across our region. I'd say on the capital front recently as well, we of course celebrate the full funding of the Red Line extension. It's a hugely historic moment for our region and for our city and our agency. And as well, this upcoming summer, we're going to be opening up our new Red Purple modernization stations. We recently broke ground on our Austin Green Line ADA accessibility project. So it feels good to be charging forward on our capital plan, even in this environment in many respects. So it's an exciting time for CTA, but look forward to talking about the funding situation in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda Metzger. I'm PACE's Executive Director. I've been with PACE since our inception, and prior to that, I was at one of our operating divisions. I worked a short stint at RTA, and I also worked a short stint at IDOT. Again, I also do not want to talk about COVID, but I think it really is an important part of what our agency is doing today. So during COVID, we went down to about 20%. We immediately came back up to 60% of our ridership. And what did that tell us? That we were carrying the people who had to get to work, to the hospitals, et cetera. We then went through our entire agency and took a look at it and said, the travel patterns are changing. What are we going to do about that? And we started our revision process, which is to look at our entire system and to reimagine what it will look like coming out of the pandemic. And we've been doing the study now for over a year intensely, and we're about to come out to public process. Again, this is about the second or third time we're coming out to the public hearing process to say, here's what we envision our suburban system to look like in the future. For us, what does it mean? We're all in the same boat in that we're underfunded. We realize that we have to do things differently and have already started to do them differently. We need to have more speed. It's that simple. We have to have more frequency. Our service in the suburbs is not frequent enough to attract people to really want to ride it on a regular basis. Where we have added frequency on our bus rapid transit lines, on our bus on shoulder service, people have come back in droves, where we have 20% increase in ridership. We need to continue to do that. To do that, we need more funding. We are going to continue to move forward with the technology aspect of what we do. On our Pulse Rapid Transit lines, they all have traffic signal priority. What does that mean? Our buses move faster. It changes the signals, and our buses stay on time and move quicker. We put that on other services in the suburbs as we can continue to expand the transit signal priority project going forward. And we're going to continue to listen to our riders as to what they want to see in the future, how we can change our system to make it better for them. And we're pretty unique. We go through 274 communities, over 3,000 square miles. Some of them are very urban, the communities, some of them are suburban, and some of them are very rural. So we run a family of services. We run express bus routes, we run regular bus routes that run on the regular streets, as well as on-demand services, paratransit services, ADA services, our van pool. We're the second largest ADA provider in the country, only behind New York. And our van pool program is about in the top 2015 in the country. And although we're the little guys here, we're the 13th largest in the country. So just to give you some comparison in our size, we're an important part of the region, and we work well with our other service boards. So thank you.
So a lot of the conversations that we've had and questions that I think we've all been asked over the past year and a half or so, a lot of it has been focused on, oh, you need to coordinate more. You need to have better coordination amongst the 3 and 4 agencies. One thing I think you sort of echoed, and we heard some of that even in the Washington and between Randy and Andy's comments earlier, is that really what I think is frequency is really key to coordination. Frequency of service, because the services, we hear this a lot, right? We hear the question, well, I rode my Pace bus, but the Metro train had just left. Or you just got off a Metro train and the Pace bus just left. But if that's a challenge when there's only a bus every 45 minutes or so. But if we're actually funded to a greater level and Pace is running 10, 15-minute service, if you just miss that bus, it's not, that frequency sort of alleviates that coordination problem as some people see it. And so that's really, I think, a real key critical thing. We do a lot of coordination across all 4 agencies, but I do think that frequency is that key to coordination, and the key to frequency is funding. So we heard from Senator Villivalam the concept about not just filling the gap of the $771 million, but working towards further investment into the transit system to the tune of about $1.5 billion, which is not a number that the transit, we didn't come up with. That actually came out of the regional study led by CMAP, and many stakeholders in this room participated in that. That 1.5 is kind of the target that we're all sort of shooting for. What I'd like to ask each of you, because this is another question we get asked a lot, is what does $1.5 billion get us for the region? What are you buying? What are the transit operators delivering for this region? And I think I'd like to just hear from you some examples of the kinds of investments in service that you would plan to make if we were successful in that space.
Sure, I can start off. So at CTA, I'm going to walk through kind of nuts and bolts what that means on a high level from CTA service, and then what that means for the region, and then I do think there's a bit of a topic that's been missing here on this topic. But first at CTA, it is frequency. On the rail, it means that throughout the day, you'd have 6-minute headways. That's the time in between trains. Throughout the day, you'd have a flow similar to our international peers that I think people envy, like London and other countries. And that means on the bus side, you'd see a bus frequent network, which is the term we use to describe buses that are running 8 minutes or faster throughout the day. And what I mean by that is 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Throughout the city, you'd have 95% of our region within a short walking distance of a bus that's running every 8 minutes. This is transformative, right? I mean, I struggle to find the right adjectives, the right words to talk about the impact of that. As a region, what that means is that's an impact on transit riders. It's also an impact on non-transit riders. It means the entire region is flowing in a way that it is not now, right? It means people are not stuck in traffic. We have a study that was done. You see upwards of $10 billion of savings created by getting people out of their cars that they're stuck in because traffic is so bad. I mean, people in cars are not just frustrated, they're also not spending any money in our economy. And so getting them out of their cars, getting them onto transit is what this kind of cascading influence would have. You'd see, for example, a mode share shift where currently, the people traveling around our region use transit about 25% of the time. You'd get closer to 45, 50% of the share of travelers around the region using transit. Things like the return on investment on that in terms of growth created is 13 times calculated for the impact. So there's all these different ways to kind of explain what that type of frequency would provide, and I think all of us feel a little bit like it's a great honor and to be walking around our state, making this pitch. But I think there is something missing from the conversation even today. And I think if you look at our region, we are one of the most segregated, if not the most segregated cities in the country. This comes from decades of systematic disinvestment in communities, and this decision in front of us is going to be part of that history. And I think the fact that it's even been missing from the dialogue is telling. This city has been created by redlining, by racial covenants that create the city that we see in front of us. And transit is a way to begin to correct that. So the power of this decision, the opportunity here is incredibly profound, and we need to look at it in the history of our city. We can... I worry, I think we need to look at GDP, we need to look at figures like that, absolutely. But let's not lose our values here. You know, I think sometimes I hear the rundown of the investments and what they could give, and it sounds a little bit like almost an AI-created system of what this can produce. There's values here, there's history here. Let's step up to the moment and do the right thing to invest in the people that have been disinvested in for decades. So I think that's a really important part when we think about what this investment means. You know, it's measurable things with dollar values. It's also hope, it's also freedom. You know, buses are an incredibly easy lever to pull to change the chemistry and the dynamic of a neighborhood. And it's within our reach to invest in those places, to flow frequency into there. And what you can't find in some of these studies about the value of transit, you know, are the young people that are applying to school just because they can actually figure out how to get there now. You know, the people that are filling out job applications because they actually think maybe they could get there every day because they see the bus flowing there. And let's not forget about that and do the right thing in this moment. So thanks.
So I couldn't agree with Nora anymore that this is really a transformative time and a time to make some really big boy decisions. Metra is unique in a sense because we spread all the way out to the outer points of the county and then all the way into this grid we call the city. We service 178 different communities. One of them is called Chicago. It's obviously got 78 individual or 77 individual unique communities within it. And I think the frequency, again, is really the key component to all of this. We'll say that, okay, it's nice that we're finally at hourly service, and in some lines we are, but we have gaps sometimes in mid part of the day, it's 2 hours or 3 hours. Again, who's gonna use the system on a gap of 2 to 3 hours, and then if the chance the pace bus got there early, left late, or something like that, it just doesn't connect. So what ends up happening is you have to build a system, probably from Chicago out, where that frequency just continues to be there. And then the challenge is in 3,700 square miles, you can't be at every single station. We have 243 stations. The two biggest commuter railroads in the country is Metro North and Long Island Railroad. Combined, Metra has the same amount of stations as they do, yet we only serve half of the populations that they do because of the density that they have. My point being, unfortunately, not every PACE bus or CTA bus can get to every single Metra station. So we've got to be, and what they're doing here with their revision programs, it's identify where the nodes are, where are going to be the transit hubs, where that frequency of service can have the most benefit, tie into the BRTs, tie into the other areas where other parts of transit can make it so that the reliability is there. I think that'll be the key, and that's where the investment comes in. More trains, but more than more trains, more buses that have the frequency and the ability to get to those nodes.
And I couldn't agree with both of these executive directors more. Where we are in time right now, first of all, I want to make one more comment before I say where we are on time, is that all three systems are one of the most efficient in the country, and I think that gets left out of the conversation. We're doing things the right way within our means. We need more means to do more. And what does that mean for PACE? That means having more express bus services. We have a plan. We know where we're headed. We already have Pulse Rapid Transit on Milwaukee Avenue and on Dempster. We're working on Halsted right now, all the way from Harvey up to the 95th Street CTA station. From the 95th Street CTA station all the way west to Palos Heights. Down Harlem, there's a lot of things down Cermak that we're working on now, and those will be frequent services that are going to run on time because they're controlled by traffic signal priority, with better stations, so people in the winter, Chicago winters are not easy, can go to these stations. They're heated. The platform it has heated ground level so that you can get up on the platform and not have to slip on ice and snow. So frequency, better service. In our more suburban or rural areas, more on-demand services, more services that get people to where they need to connect to, but we're not going to run a big bus frequently where it's not needed. But we are going to provide the service that is needed to our customers and to the region as a whole. That's our goal. And Jim, I have to correct you one thing, is our buses aren't early or late. They're on time.
And if I could just add to, I think, you know, the funding discussion, you'll hear us talk a lot about we could do more with more money. And I want to be careful, that's not an excuse, right? I think, and part of the story is the scale of the funding issue, right? If it was minor, that would be one thing. But we're talking about severe underfunding that has been entrenched for a very long time. I mean, at CTA, we provide 84% of the region's rides and get less than 50% of the funding. Our subsidy per rider is much less than our peer agencies, both locally and nationally. We are stretching every dollar in what we do. And so when we hear people understandably ask, why isn't there a bus connecting CTA and Metra in this one area, we do raise funding because we have to make very hard decisions, also because of the recovery ratio. We're incentivized to have to serve more populated, denser areas. And people lose in that scenario. And the scale is important to understand. So it's not just money coming up in general, but understanding the severity of that underfunding and how it informs what we do, and alternatively, the things we could do when it's corrected.
I was going to ask you for some more specific, an example each. I mean, you all talked about sort of those broad areas and sort of frequency, but is there a specific project or something that you kind of contemplate would be top on the list to deliver, to kind of give people a bit more flavor of what that investment, and Nora, I think you're exactly right, it's sort of the ending decades of underinvestment, disinvestment. We actually did some videos and some vignettes, because a lot of times some of this is also about telling the story about what the challenges are that we're facing and how can they meaningfully impact people. It's fine to hear kind of heads of organizations talk about what the challenges are, but sort of people in our communities talking about what those issues are and how public transportation has changed their lives. We did a sort of a series of vignettes of different riders across our system. One was an Amazon worker in the south suburbs, and how he uses PACE to get to his job. Could not get that job except that there was PACE service being provided to that location. There's another one, and I think there's also one with coordination on CTA services. There's another one that's a student connecting to community college who could not get to community college but for public transportation. So I think sometimes too, helping get the message out and using other people to sort of talk about what the challenges are, I think speaks volumes. Would there be sort of one key, and I know that there's many, but could you give an example maybe of one kind of area that you really think, you talked about regional rail, but give maybe an example of what that might actually look like if we can just kind of go through.
Yeah, so the challenge again, where I started off by saying we don't own a lot of it, we own some of it, we don't own a lot of it, so that also means we don't control it. So the idea of regional rail is kind of what we've done on the UP North line, and mostly the type of model we have on the northern end of the Metro Electric, and somewhat what we've done on the BNSF. Where during peak periods, we're down to 20-minute headways. Hyde Park's a great example of that. Over the last 2 decades, Hyde Park's really grown to be one of the biggest stations on the Metro Electric, and it's because of the frequency of service. The UP North line, typically on a normal day, is one of the line leaders, and it's because of the frequency of service that we put out there, more of the regional rail pattern. The BNSF, because of the fact it's triple tracked, even though it's controlled by a freight railroad, a Class 1 freight railroad, and dispatched by them, it's the infrastructure that's in place. So for Metra to get that frequency of service there, it's not just simply I want and I'll pay, it's also going to have to be about the investment of the infrastructure that's needed. When you're going down the railroad, you're coming into Chicago from Waukegan, there's 5-6 trains during that same train trip that are coming out. There's only 2 tracks. You can't put both trains on the same track, so you have to use crossovers, and it has to be timed, and it has to move around each other. So The beauty of a system that Randy runs, for the most part, all trains going this way are on this track, and all trains going that way are on that track. It's beautiful. The way they built WMATA, the way they built BART in the 1960s is not the system that we inherited that was built in the 1860s. And that's really part of the challenge that we have. So it would be frequency of service on almost all of our lines. We have real big challenges on our Heritage Corridor line. We have to run a gauntlet over 6 rail grade crossings. There's about 150 train movements a day on that line. So just to even envision, hey, I'm going to put people on there and I'm going to try to get them downtown 95% of the time. When I say I'm going to get them downtown, it's a challenge today. It's a challenge today with only 3 in and 3 out, with only 6 trains on that line. So unfortunately, I'd love to be able to say all 11 lines would get the exact same level of service, but the reality is we'd have to, where the infrastructure exists, build that more robust service. Where the infrastructure doesn't exist, work on our plans that we already have worked out. We've got great innovative team members that have come up with all the solutions. It really boils down to the funding to make sure that the infrastructure can be put in place to run that frequency of service. And ultimately, someday, O'Hare service. I mean, we know the Blue Line goes to O'Hare today. We could do it in 1 stop. We can do it in 28 minutes. We demonstrated this during the DNC. But that will take some serious infrastructure because we have to partner with and protect interstate commerce that occurs with all our freight partners.
Nora, is there an example you'd like to highlight?
Sure, I think, and people locally familiar with transit need would be familiar with our Blue Line West heading out to Forest Park is a great example of where there is a lot of appetite and partnership around improving that branch, from the tracks to rebuilding the stations, to the road on the highway, as well as the bridges that cross over it, and deeply involved are CTA, RTA, PACE, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Everybody's at the table, with distinct regional discussions, and there's a corridor development office that's been set up. There's a lot of appetite also from legislators to rebuild that whole area of the system, and I think there's a really exciting opportunity to get that project moving. We've done some great track work over the past couple of years on that, and I think it's a great example for people that are interested in our slow zones and kind of the cause of that and the level of investment that's needed to address those. We've seen improvements there, and I think that project with funding, and we've gotten some, and we work together with that big group to apply for further grants, but we need much more. It's a huge project. That project would be hugely transformative for the region and have cascading effects to the communities that surround it.
So Melinda, I'm going to actually tee up something for you, but then you can also add whatever you want. But
I had my thoughts, but
go ahead. Maybe they coincide. Yeah. Randy talked about sort of walk, crawl, run, and learn by doing. Our region, almost a decade and a half ago, we worked with the legislature and IDOT to look at bus on shoulder, and we did it as a pilot. We did some initial study. I, in my method to my madness, paid for a couple of DOT guys from another state to fly in and talk to our DOT guys here, because they didn't want to hear from the transit people how it would work. They wanted to hear it from DOT guys. That's how we got bus on shoulder on I-55. Then PACE kind of ran with that literally and expanded to the bus on shoulder, the incredibly successful bus on shoulder on I-90 in partnership with the tollway. Then you've teed up all your Pulse projects. So talk maybe a little bit about what further investment could deliver and your plans in that space.
So, well, you hit it pretty well. Bus on shoulder is fantastic. Again, it leads to 2 things. One, frequency. We've just added back 81 trips on our original bus on shoulder service, and we're seeing massive increases in ridership again because it's frequent. But 2, it's on time because we're riding around the traffic on the shoulder to the downtown area. For PACE, we have a little bit more of a unique operating atmosphere because it's not just service going downtown. What has really changed is people are working from home, people are traveling, they're commuting suburb to suburb. So our bus rapid transit is addressing the needs of suburb to suburb, as well as connecting with our CTA and Metra. But for us, it's about partnerships. We're partnering with these other agencies, trying to figure out how we can move people not only suburb to suburb, but also move them onto the other two systems or get them to their first mile, last mile after they get off the other two systems. And so, you know, one project for me that's really visionary, and I'm so excited about it, is a partnership with Metra. We have a transit terminal in Harvey that is about a block and a half away from the Metra station. We got Rebuild Illinois money from the state of Illinois to rebuild it. And we said, stop, let's think about this now. Instead of rebuilding the station exactly where it is, what if we partner with Metra? What if we partner with the city of Harvey and IDOT and move our station next to the Metra station, make it a multimodal station where you can transfer from Metra to PACE and from PACE to CTA. How does PACE and CTA get involved in this? Because this project is so transformative that you will be able to take our PACE bus from Harvey up Halsted to the Red Line 95th Street station. Once it's complete, we're going to have the room to have all these buses that will travel, get people to the city that way. Or the long-term goal here is to have our buses going up the shoulder of 294 all the way up to the O'Hare area. So we get people to jobs and people who want to, you know, commute from the Harvey area and all in that southern Cook County area to O'Hare or to downtown. We can move them if we have this kind of transformational money we have the money right now for the project, but we need the money to operate the service. And to me, that will just change the whole region and assist getting people to the jobs that are out there.
Thank you for those insights. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask any of us up here any questions that you might have. We do have some people roaming with mics, I think. Yes. So I see some hands over that direction. Do we want to head that way, if you wouldn't mind? And if you can just tell us who you are, that helps just in the conversation, I think, for context too. Thank you.
Hi.
Testing.
Here we go. My name's Ben Harris. One's a question and one's an aha. One of the questions is there talk about integration with the South Shore Line with Indiana? Is that on the table? And the second, an aha was, got a great micro-transit center, mobility center at O'Hare. You got to go back to the terminal to buy a CTA card or a PACE card. There's no kiosk at that place. So just a thought.
Yeah, on the NICTE question, really, you're crossing state lines and you're crossing different fundings, and that's one of the bigger challenges here. We're a great partner with NICTE. A matter of fact, NICTE is investing almost $200 million in our region up near Van Buren, adding another track to add additional capacity for what they've done in the state. But as far as integration, we can have that conversation about a fair integration. I think it's going to also be, looking at the ridership patterns. Currently, the ridership patterns for NICTE are pretty much from Indiana all the way downtown. But we'll continue. We'll have those conversations for sure.
We have two questions. Oh, there's one over there, and then we'll come to these two up front.
Hey there, my name is Ray. I'm unaffiliated. I'm here as a writer. And I wanted to ask a question about safety. It's something that RTA has made really clear is important to the future of transit in our city, in our beautiful city. And there was a suggestion earlier in this event by Randy that creating a transit-owned police force would promote safety and decrease crime in our city. And I wanted to emphasize that police don't create safety in our city, and I think it's important to consider the ways in which increased police presence criminalizes Black and brown people, people with disabilities, poverty, and to create a more safer system and a more safer city we have to find new ways of creating safety on our transit system. So his model for and also the police district is one of the most well-funded agencies in the country, and so and even if you do believe that police do increase safety, it's also a huge investment into a duplicative police force that doesn't integrate with the system that we already have. So I'm curious, I know that the Metropolitan Mobility Act and the labor plans do suggest a police force, and I haven't seen that in RTA's plans, and I just really want to commend RTA for putting in the work to talk to safety advocates. So you hold your safety summits and have some really incredible solutions to these problems. So I wanted to ask if that same suggestion of creating an RTA police force is a part of your legislation that you're working on.
So I'll let Nora speak to also some of the actions that CTA is taking across their system. In terms of safety and security, I think one of the things the RTA is proposing as part of reform legislation is an ambassador program, a system-wide ambassador program. And I think it was maybe just the way Randy explained some of it. They've got their police force, but then he also talked about 100 other staff that are, he might have said they were officers, but I don't think they're actually sworn like police officers, but they're sort of rider advocates using and riding around the system. But I think that is absolutely something from an RTA perspective that we think will have a positive benefit across the transit system. Metra already has its own police force, so we don't necessarily see the need to actually sort of replicate on top of that. I think, though, there is a role in place for additional security and policing in the appropriate fashion, but coordinated across, as we've talked about, really, Safety Summit about 1.5 years ago now talked about sort of that integration of services, that it's taking a holistic view, an early intervention view, and a support view in the complexity of, mental health, homelessness, drug addiction, and those kinds of elements. We have to think about all of this holistically. We think an ambassador program is not going to fix the problems, but it is one component that helps in terms of a presence in and around the transit system that creates also and supports an environment of safety that can sort of help with intervention and providing support both for the frontline workers as well as the riders and even people that are maybe in crisis that are on the transit system. But I did want to give Nora the opportunity because I know she's sort of made it a focus of some of her efforts in the past couple of months.
Sure, thanks. And I appreciate the question and the thoughtfulness around the complexities on this issue. I think it gets spoken about often in a fairly oversimplified way. At CTA, I'd say we should move on all fronts around the importance of safety on the system. It's so important that people feel safe and welcomed on the system. Part of that is police, but part of that are other dynamics as well. And we are looking into something like an ambassador program. We've put $3 million aside in our budget this year to do stakeholder engagement, to consider, what people would like to see on the system. From my work on the ambassador concept and hearing a lot about it, one of the struggles is I think people mean different things when they say that term. I'd almost like to create a new term other than transit ambassador, just because I think some people mean a trained social service, mental health expert. Some people may mean more of a customer service facing component. I think they're all important and should be talked about. But I'd actually like to advance the discussion to something a bit more concrete into what we all mean when we say that. At CTA, since I've taken the position, a lot of my focus has been on targeting resources to places that we know need attention. We have a vast system, right? So when we talk about policing a system of our size, 11,000 bus stops, 146 stations, hundreds of miles of track, right? There's almost an absurdity to suggesting police would be covering every part of that, even if police are your answer, right? This is a huge system. So you have to be smart about it. You have to target the resources, and we have a ton of information about the experience of riders on the CTA. It's one of the reasons I've promoted my own constant ridership on the system, because I know it from experience that smoking is an issue. I think to people that aren't on the system, it might sound like a very narrow focus, but those of us that are on know that service has improved. Trains are coming, buses are coming. It's not perfect, but service has improved vastly. And we also know, the word cleanliness is something I don't mean to be doing such a definition assessment here of what every word means, but even that word I always want to dive into more, because I think we mean something, we might mean, an empty McDonald's bag on the seat. We might mean something else about kind of the reality that people are in situations where they have to live on our system, and it doesn't feel appropriate, it doesn't feel humane, and people know that. We also might mean that I just got on a car where maybe nothing's on the seats or the floor, but it smells like cigarette smoke, and so it doesn't feel clean, right? That can be a daunting task to take on, but the reason I raised it is because I want the public to know, I know they're experiencing it, they have the expectation we should be trying to do something about it, and we are. So we're using information we have a chat bot that is a virtual agent where you can go on our website and report a disturbance or compliment an employee as well. All different types of maintenance issues you can report via our chat bot. And for example, we have information there where people report smoking. And there are actually trends of where you might see smoking more on our system than others. And with that information, we do send our own security resources as well as some police assistance as well, just to have a strong presence where we know people are seeing that more, and also for riders to see that the presence is there working to address it. So that's just one example. I just think that it's important and our responsibility as leaders in this position to strategize about where these resources are going, no matter what they are, and to look at all of them, and to not limit ourselves to just one.
And I just want to add from the PACE perspective, again, we go through 274 communities, so what do? We use the local police, but we also partner with the local police in that we will provide training for them, both the police and the fire department, on how to respond to situations on our vehicles. We also have an extensive, as does CTA and I believe Metra, extensive camera system on our vehicles, including something that we're trying now, which is when you walk on the bus, you'll see a monitor there, so you'll see yourself getting on the vehicle, so you know that you're being monitored, and hopefully your behavior will get better. But besides all of that, what I really wanted to emphasize on our system is we do have a transit ambassador program that we use our own employees to get out and ride the vehicles. When we have major service changes or we have something we want our customers to know about, we're out there so they can talk to us. We go out on the buses, we go out to our transit centers, and they get to see the face of the people who work at PACE as opposed to a police officer or something like that. So that's the way we've been approaching it.
We have, I think, we've got two here, but we've got time only for one more. The rest of us can be available as we transition to answer other questions for you individually.
Hey, my name's Ashley Dotson. I'm a recent transplant to the Chicago area. I came in October. I was kind of curious about the general views about the RTA plan in terms of merging, because I know one of my concerns is, as you mentioned, CTA gets like 85% of the ridership and less than half of the funding. I get a little worried with any sort of unison between all three that sometimes the suburbs could then push out Chicago, even though I do feel like as the largest source of ridership, that kind of does feel like it might be a little bit more important over the whole system. Not to say the others are not important, not trying to minimize you guys, but so I was just kind of curious on thoughts on that.
In the interest of time, if you guys want to say something different, but I guess I think collectively we don't necessarily see that creating one mega agency solves for any of the challenges and issues that we're facing. And I think from the RTA's perspective, we've tried to put forward reforms that actually drive towards outcomes that we've heard and see that are needed across the system. Plus, because of the timing of the fiscal cliff, you know, any mega transition is going to take multiple years. And while if the elected officials ultimately have that as a long-term goal, perhaps those conversations can continue, but we can't. We need to make decisions around what the system's going to look like and how it's going to be funded so we can actually keep it running.
Yeah, and I would just echo, I mean, we've said before, we don't think the mega agency is the answer to the issues. Certainly, I think there are aspects in which our region can improve, and CTA acknowledges that. You know, part of what I've been touting with the funding issue is because I do want to be clear that, you know, a lot of those gaps that people see, the deficiencies, the desires that they have, you know, you do have to look at the numbers as well. We have to do both. We have to look at the numbers, and then we have to also think about, of course, how we can continue to work together and produce great outcomes for our riders. I think the conversations over the last year have been really fruitful, and you've seen really specific common themes in what people want more from our region. And so I think, why not dive into the specific improvements and start making a plan around that, as opposed to kind of talking about a larger board, you know, just because it sort of sounds like something that could manage it better. I think we know what people want. Let's keep working on it. Let's get to work on it. Let's get the funding to do it, and we'll be much closer to executing it.
So we have to wrap up. We've run a little long on this panel. We were on time, and now we're behind. I'll turn it back over to Kyle.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you to all the executive directors. So our final portion of the program is the interactive sessions. I know there were some more questions out there. Sorry we couldn't get to those with this panel, but the good thing is you can talk to staff from each of these agencies directly at the breakout tables. So we've separated into 5 topics that we get asked a lot about from legislators and riders and people all around the region. And we will have staff from each agency at each set of tables. It's not like a formal discussion. You don't need to be at the table at a certain time or exit the table at a certain time. Staff will be there. They'll have materials that you can review if you'd like, and you could provide feedback, ask questions in a one-on-one format, in a small group format, really whatever works for you as you're moving about the room. I think we have about 35, 40 minutes for this portion of the program before Chairman Dillard will give some closing remarks. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your participation. Our final portion of the program, I want to invite to the stage the chairman of the RTA. I like to call him our region's chief transit advocate, an incredible leader and spokesperson for our cause. So for some closing remarks, the chairman of the RTA, Clarke Dillard.
Thank you, everyone. I will wrap us up. I'm Clarke Dillard, the chairman of the Regional Transportation Authority, and I want to start quickly by thanking our speakers today and our guests. A special thanks to our guests who traveled here from Washington and San Francisco to be here, and they shared some fantastic insights from their own work in their own cities. And we at the RTA work with our counterparts in every major city in the world. There is no plagiarism for great ideas from places. And sometimes we forget, as we heard from Washington's representative here today, how good our system really is. And sometimes it's the envy of other cities. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do, but sometimes we just forget how fortunate we are to at least have a good structure for our transit system. To the legislators and the elected officials who came here today, we deeply appreciate your ongoing commitment to ensuring that transit in our region continues to serve our constituents, and we need to do it better and better and better. To the board members and the staff of all the transit agencies and the government agencies that are here today, thank you for your dedication and your partnership and cooperation with us, and always having an open door for us when we want to bounce ideas off of you. And perhaps most importantly, to the riders, the concerned citizens and advocates who are here today, the backbone of our whole transit system and why we exist in this region. We owe you the greatest amount of thanks. Thanks for your continued ability to raise your voices, raise your concerns, talk to your elected leaders, and give us feedback that we all need to hear from the top on down every day. This is the third one of these summits we've gathered at since the adoption of our Transit is the Answer, our 5-year strategic plan, adopted just a little more than 2 years ago. First one was on safety. We produced direct action from that summit itself. We watched station activation events take place across the region, bringing transit stations to life and creating spaces that were inviting for riders and non-riders alike. The work done at these summits carries through to today, where many of us stand in agreement, and we heard Nora from the CTA, I don't care what it's called, but the Transit Ambassador Program. If we're provided the amount of money that we are seeking, we can have that type of individualized and diverse, extensive service. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to provide safety for all our riders and our operators. So we forget of the men and women who work for the CTA, Metra, and PACE are out there with us riders every day. But these summit meetings have solidified ideas and are making and will make, and they do make, so thank you for being here, a real difference. Last fall, we gathered and hundreds of people came to our Arlington Heights summit, and we gathered feedback on how to improve regional connections. We have a very older spoke system, as we've heard here today, but how to improve connections and further integrate the system, especially in a changing working environment in the metropolitan Chicago area. And the feedback we heard there is going to go on to inform and service plannings at our transit agencies who are taking those ideas they were given there and implementing them in everyday life. And specifically to inform the transforming transit vision to complete it that I announced at the City Club in January. Which brings us to today. We are gathered here and hopefully, if granted the $1.5 billion in funding that we are seeking, we're going to implement changes that need to be made to bring about a system that we know the riders and workers and taxpayers of this region and the employers deserve. It starts with more frequent service, where wait times are cut by 50%. Imagine that, folks. And riders don't need to depend upon an app to tell them when the next bus is coming, because the service will be so frequent and so reliable, they'll know a train's going to arrive soon, no matter where they're at in any of the metropolitan 6-county Chicago area. And we know it's equally important to provide a safer and a cleaner system, where each agency has the ample staff and budget to improve their stations, to keep them clean, and to make sure that all the stops and vehicles that anybody's on, any rider is on, they always feel safe and comfortable. And where we have the funding to recruit and hire and train transit ambassadors, or whatever you want to call them, to help use and help all the users and provide a more human presence on our system. With more funding and authority given to the RTA, we can focus on a more seamless and integrated service, which is something that I think we all espouse in this room. We all agree and we need to move this system forward for our riders. It doesn't matter, I don't want it to matter, whether they get on a PACE bus or a CTA bus or a Metra train. We need an integrated fare product for all of our 3 service areas, and our transit systems need to be interconnected with one app. It doesn't matter whether you're on CTA, Metra, or PACE. And finally, we agree we need this service provided by the agencies that do their work to be very transparent and much more accountable to the customers and to the taxpayers and to the legislators who we're going to deal with in the next 6 weeks and beyond extensively. This is going to take shape in the form of service standards understood by both riders and communities with mechanisms in place that the standards for service are going to be met. And I believe that strongly. The RTA has set forward a proposal through our vision of transforming transit. We are encouraged by the support we've heard over the last few months and then again from all of you today. But I want to end with this note. As much as we all agree that funding must come with reform, and I have been for reform from day one, I ask all of us, everybody gathered here today, and everybody that's going to watch this online or digitally later or in a soundbite, to keep in mind that the crisis before us is very real. It is very, very real. If we don't have a resolution on funding by the time the legislature wraps up in about 6 weeks from now, we're going to face a very, very stark future. Cuts of this magnitude would make us need to balance our budget as required by law and will not stop. We cannot stop all the progress and kill all the good ideas that have been happening by now. Double-digit ridership increases over the last few years have not happened by accident. They've happened through great planning of many of the people and staff that you've heard up here today. We can't kill those ideas that have helped move our system forward, and we've got to keep getting our riders back and helping our economy. But it will mean that this process will ultimately leave us with a system, if there are budget cuts of the magnitude we've never seen before, that we wouldn't recognize. The kind of transit system we could have or would have, and the kinds of cuts we would have to make would be unfathomable. And I'm not sure there's ever been a time, I know there's never been a time, when we've ever had any of these draconian type magnitude cuts that would be around. It's just simply never happened before. We would not recognize this city or this region if we don't get the funding from Springfield that we need. You've heard Leanne and others tell you we rank dead last in state support for the operations of mass transit. So we wouldn't recognize the city, and none of us would want to live in the environment if we don't support our mass transit system. So I hope you'll join me with this pledge so that we will walk out of this room today and share what you heard here today with others, everybody that you see, that you will send others to the SaveTransitNow.org. That's SaveTransitNow.org, so we can submit legislators to legislators that will make sure that your friends and coworkers understand the choices we are facing, and we must make that action take place over the next several weeks. I'm a true believer in transit. I was literally born on it, on the CTA. I told our friends from San Francisco, our friend from San Francisco today, I rode the CTA when I was 3 days old with my parents and grandparents. So I'm a believer in this region. I'm a believer in mass transit, and I know that we can all work together to make this happen. And I thank each of you again for being the future that we all see. With transparency and frequency, this transit system can be the best it can be. So thank you all so much for being here today. Deeply, deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. As I mentioned, feel free to follow up with RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE staff. If you have any questions, it's going to be a busy 6 weeks for all of us, so we look forward to hearing from you. in terms of today, just a heads up, we do have to be out of this space within the next 10 minutes. The Cultural Center has been really great hosting us, but they now want us to leave. So go prepare for your transit trip, and we can keep the conversations going outside. Thank you.